The case of Belinda Temple. Belinda Temple was born and raised in Texas. In 1986, Belinda went to college in her hometown while her twin sister, Brenda, left to study at Stephen F. Austin University. Belinda decided to stay with her parents because she was dating Marshall Comer, who was 3 years older than her. She was completely absorbed in the relationship. However, Belinda's parents were not pleased. They were concerned that the relationship would disrupt her studies, leading to her having children early and dropping out of school. This caused a lot of tension in the family. Belinda's mother, Carol, did not agree to her daughter living with Marshall. Belinda was a strong-willed and determined girl, and she may have taken her mother's advice as a threat. So at a family dinner when Marshall was invited, Belinda and Marshall, despite their mother's objections, announced that they were getting married. The atmosphere at the dinner table became heavy and quiet. Belinda decided to get married to prove to her parents she was an adult. Her boyfriend wasn't eager, but didn't refuse. They married without a grand celebration, with Belinda wearing her sister's white dress and spending the day with friends drinking champagne. The next day, she moved in with him at his parents' place. The marriage was mainly to stop her mom's criticism and gain independence. But not 6 months later, Marshall began to spend little time at home, saying he was working late, but was actually with another woman. Belinda found out when she noticed that her husband was acting strangely one day. She waited until his workday was over and followed her husband. And that's when it all came to light. Marshall was walking hand in hand with some strange woman, most likely with his colleague. Belinda didn't start any arguments or jealousy. She just packed her things and went back to her mother. Marshall kept trying to ask for Belinda's forgiveness, but she wouldn't budge. After that, they soon divorced. In 1987, Belinda had nothing to keep her in her hometown, so she decided to follow her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University. Her time at the university was a positive experience for Belinda. It seemed that she had found her purpose. In addition to studying, Belinda also worked part-time as a basketball coach, and the young girl had very high expectations. At the same university, Belinda met David Temple. Like Belinda, he was also a part-time coach but in soccer, and he was also a member of the university soccer team as captain. For David, soccer was an integral part of life. He had started practicing soccer since he was a child, and from that time on, it was clear that he had the potential to become a star at school. He often played soccer very successfully for the team and was respected by all the teachers, despite his unpleasant personality. David can easily insult or even hit someone, but he gets away with it easily when he is on the field during a match. He often starts the match in a heated situation and then takes a long time to calm down. One of David's teammates said that he has an aggressive nature because of his steroid use. However, in their relationship, David acts completely differently from Belinda. He becomes a caring person and loves her very much. As soon as someone smiles at Belinda, David becomes jealous and tries to clarify his relationship. Belinda met David's family and they were impressed with her. They thought that Belinda and David had a lot in common. But Belinda's sister was not happy about the relationship. They knew Belinda as a strong-willed and independent person before, but as the relationship began, they noticed a change in her. Belinda became withdrawn, quiet and modest, and her life seemed to revolve around pleasing David. Belinda also began to distance herself from her family. She called her parents less often and stopped visiting home as she used to. This was a worrying sign in a toxic relationship. However, David and Belinda continued their relationship. They bought a bull terrier and named him Shaq. After graduating from college, they decided to get married. In January 1999, David and Belinda Temple were expecting their second child. Belinda was nearing her due date, and doctors predicted that she would go into labor in a few weeks. As a pregnant mother, Belinda often felt tired and fatigued. She also had to care for her son Evan. To give his wife some rest, David decided to take Evan for a walk in the park that evening. They walked in the fresh air, but soon felt tired and hungry. They then went to a restaurant for a bite to eat. When they got home, David was shocked to find the front door of his house broken. To keep Evan safe, David quickly took his son to a friend's house who lived nearby, and when his son asked why he couldn't come home, David lied and said his mother was in the hospital. One of David's neighbors, Quentin Harland, had just opened the door to the unexpected visitor, David. He carried his son straight into the living room and quickly returned to the house. Quentin was confused by this and yelled for his wife to watch the child and ran after David. He asked David what's going on, but when he saw the broken front door of the Temple house, Quentin realized that David probably had no idea what was waiting for him inside. When he entered the house, Quentin saw a horrible scene. Everything was in ruins. The cabinets were open. Furniture was scattered on the floor, and especially there were blood stains on the floor leading to the stairs. Quentin quickly pushed David aside and saw under the stairs, in the dressing room, Belinda lying face down with her arms outstretched in a large hole in the back of her head. David seemed too shocked to say anything or rush to his wife's body. He took out his cell phone and called the police. Police immediately rushed to the scene but did not enter the house immediately because the Temple family's dog, Shaq, was aggressive. The dog growled and barked at the uniformed officers, prompting one of them to draw his gun. However, the situation was calmed when David Temple came out of the house, then led the dog into the garage. When the officers entered the house, they investigated the scene and concluded that it appeared that a robbery had occurred. They speculated that the burglars did not know that the homeowner was in the house at the time, so they shot her to avoid exposing witnesses. The police began investigating the crime scene. They wondered how the burglar could have entered a house guarded by a ferocious bull terrier. They began to investigate carefully. At the main entrance, the police found broken glass. But this glass was not broken by someone trying to unlock it from the inside, as the glass fragments would have been concentrated near the threshold. Instead, the glass fragments were located far from the door to the right of the entrance. This indicated that the main door was unlocked and the glass was broken, and it was unclear why the burglar did so. The police opened the box on the nightstand in the living room and found several pieces of jewelry that appeared to be gold. It was unclear why the burglar did not take these pieces of jewelry. The more they investigated, the more suspicious the police became that something was not right around the case. The police's experience with robberies had taught them that the criminal would usually take whatever was valuable and could be found. But in this case, nothing seemed to have been taken. And the fact that the dog was still in their minds was a big deal. Something was wrong with the case. In the murder, the wound suggested the victim had been shot in the back of the head. It is likely that the weapon used was a 12-gauge shotgun since the victim was kneeling with his back to the killer. But shotguns were uncommon in robberies and were difficult to carry or transport without being detected, which made the police even more suspicious. In the murder of Belinda, it happened at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. A typical criminal would not dare go out with a shotgun in the daytime. David mentioned that he owned a few rifles. However, when the police came to search, the handgun involved in the case was not among the weapons that David had reported. The police asked David to come to the police station to file a report and confess the stolen items. Although worried, David agreed to participate. Police began investigating Belinda's relationships. A young boy named Riley Joe Sanders came to the attention of the police. Riley is a student of Belinda's at school. He has an explosive personality and is especially fond of skipping school. Belinda was not one of those teachers who turned a blind eye to student absenteeism. So when she noticed that one of her students, Riley, had been absent from class for months, she immediately reached out to her colleagues. She wanted to know if this was her problem as a teacher or if the boy was a systematic truant. Her colleagues answered that it was not her problem. Boy was brought up in a bad family and no one cared about him. He appeared at school only rarely. Belinda couldn't leave it at that. That same evening she visited his mother, who lived nearby, and had a serious talk with her, which later bore fruit. However, it wasn't quite what the young teacher had expected. Riley Joe Sanders came to class. But during a basketball game, when Sanders pushed his opponent and Belinda pointed out Riley's disgusting behavior, he insulted her with the last words and even said something like, "You'll answer to me for this. You better look around, especially in the evenings." Riley had no explanation for where he was on the day of the murder and had also threatened Belinda. He was brought in for questioning. His father had a 12 caliber gun, but when the police searched the house, they did not find a weapon. When Riley realized that the police suspected him, he confessed that he had been with friends on the day of the murder. He had kept quiet because he had been in a large group and did not want to hurt anyone. The charges against Riley were dropped. Beside that, the police began questioning Quentin Harland. David and Quentin were not only neighbors but also co-workers at the same school. They had a close friendship and often met outside of work to watch sports on TV or attend family barbecues. One day, David and Quentin discovered a new young teacher at the school named Heather Scott. Quentin showed special interest in her, even asking her out to dinner, but Quentin's efforts were unsuccessful because Heather declined the invitation. Quentin accidentally discovered a secret relationship between David and another woman. This made Quentin very angry and resentful because David was married and had a son. However, Quentin kept it a secret and did not reveal anything to others. In the work environment, David and this woman seemed to be a happy couple, and many people in the teaching staff had the same impression. However, no one knew that David had another wife named Belinda. Belinda did not suspect that her husband was having an affair. In fact, she even shared with Quentin that she suspected that David was cheating. But Quentin reassured her that David was a good man and could not do such a thing. However, the way David treated Belinda also changed over time. In the past, he was very respectful and loving towards her. But now he often insulted and hurt her. He called her fat, even though she had only gained the little weight after giving birth. He also often asked her to go to another room when there were guests in the house, as if she did not deserve to be with everyone. Belinda felt extremely unhappy and lonely when faced with this treatment from David. She did not dare to talk seriously with him about this, but cried at night and felt bad about herself. Meanwhile, David was in a very happy new romantic relationship with Heather. David increasingly distant from his family. The psychological pressure he put on his wife was increasing. Although he never raised a hand to hit her, their interactions consisted almost exclusively of insults. At this time, Belinda learned that she was pregnant. When she received this news, she forgot all of David's previous mistakes and felt very happy. It seemed that David also tried to present himself as a happy father, but he was unsuccessful. Sometimes David did not come home at night, and Belinda was afraid to ask him why he was absent at night. She was afraid that her husband might become very angry and cause a scandal. Therefore, Belinda often had to do everything herself while preparing for the birth of the child. She went shopping, painted the walls herself, and assembled the furniture she had bought. David seemed unconcerned and made no effort to help his wife. Belinda prepared everything for the upcoming baby herself, while David seemed to be only concerned with his new relationship. Christmas was approaching, and Belinda was 8 months pregnant. She decided to discuss with her husband David what gifts they would give each other for the occasion. However, David suggested that they skip giving each other gifts this year. He thought it would be better if they used their savings for the upcoming baby, as the doctors had warned that she might go into labor early and the baby might be born before the new year. When Christmas came, although they had agreed not to give each other gifts, David did not give Belinda any small gifts. Instead, he suddenly packed his things and said that he would spend the New Year holiday hunting with his friends. Belinda felt disappointed and shared the situation with her sister. Her sister decided to help Belinda feel less alone. She also wanted to be there to care for Belinda, as doctors had warned that labor could start at any moment. What Belinda did not know, however, was that David had not gone hunting with his friends. Instead, he had spent the holiday with Heather, who was wearing a gold necklace that was said to have been a Christmas gift from David. After the death of Belinda Temple, David remarried Heather in 2001 and they had a son, Evan. But in November 2004, David's peace was shattered when the police came knocking on his door and arrested him on suspicion of murdering his ex-wife. David continued to deny any guilt. Investigators discovered that his new relationship with Heather may have been the motive for the crime. David's co-workers said that when Belinda became pregnant, David often bragged that he had found a younger, more beautiful woman to replace his wife. According to the prosecution's report, David killed Belinda as soon as she got home, still wearing her uniform and work boots. He then staged the crime scene to look like a robbery by making a mess of the house and quickly taking his son to the park to create an alibi. The prosecution also added that nothing was stolen from the house, and there was a vicious dog in the yard that would not let any stranger in. The murder weapon was probably dropped by David in the rice paddy, as witnesses saw David's car stop near the paddy, with only Evan in the car at the time. However, the shotgun was never recovered in that area. Heather's testimony claimed that before Belinda's murder, her relationship with David was not serious and she did not even love him. These words certainly did not please Temple and introduced confusion into the jury's decision. Could David kill his wife for a non-serious relationship? Or was Heather lying to save her husband? It wasn't until 2023 that the case was revisited. David was found guilty after all and was sentenced to life in prison with parole after 17 years. His son Evan, while the trial was ongoing, did not believe that his father was capable of such a cold-blooded murder and supported him until the last moment. Greg Costas came to the heartbreaking conclusion that Jessica Lynn Keene had been abducted and held captive in a car, but she had only just tried to elude her captor. She then ran across a country road in fear for her life and entered a cemetery where, based on a knee print in the ground and a misplaced sock, she may have attempted to conceal herself behind a gravestone. Unfortunately, when she thought her attacker had lost track of her, She fled her hiding spot and crashed into a fence post in the dead of night as she attempted to flee and reach a nearby farmhouse. Since the farmhouse was lit up, she intended to run toward it, believing someone was there to save her from the monster running after her. Sadly, she couldn't make it there on time, as her great fall alerted her attacker, who later discovered her and killed her with a 70-pound gravestone. This discovery devastated her family, friends, and the police. They couldn't fathom the horror she must have experienced as she tried so hard to stay alive. According to Special Agent Costas, he was adamantly determined to use all of his resources to identify the killer of the promising teenager and solve the murder. I've never been so passionate about anything that I've ever worked on in my life. The thought of this young girl, 15 years old, who had such a bright future, being murdered in such a horrible, horrible fashion. You cannot help but want to do everything humanly possible to find out who did this, Agent Costa said. Rebecca Keene was clearly mortified by the terrible crime and haunted by the extreme fear her daughter must have experienced while attempting to find safety in the pitch-black cemetery. Everything I tried to prevent, her life from being ruined, happened anyway, a devastated Rebecca told the media. As the investigation progressed, sheriffs in Madison County focused on Sean Thompson, Jessica's boyfriend, but they discovered that he wasn't in Columbus when Jessica was murdered. Sean and a few of his friends had left for Florida. However, they were eventually sent back to Ohio. The police collected Sean's DNA and interrogated him and his friends in great detail, but it was quickly determined that he and his friends were not party to the incident. This was because the DNA from the semen sample at the crime scene did not match Sean's or even his friends. They were, however, exonerated of all charges. Though, for the investigators, a whole week had passed, and the search for the actual murderer or murderers had become fruitless. Even so, Jessica's mother's nightmares about her passing never stopped. What they did to her, the fear that Jessica felt. She would do anything to get away, and I can feel her heartbeat running through the cemetery. I can feel the deep breathing she was probably doing when she knelt behind the tombstone. I can hear her praying, and I realized that that was the worst thing that I believe anyone could go through, Rebecca said. The investigation gradually became unproductive. Investigators, however, were unable to forget the grisly murder that had occurred on their doorstep, and they continued to periodically review the evidence in the hope that new information might come forward someday. At last, it actually did in February 2008. After rerunning the semen sample from the crime scene through the system, Madison County Sheriff Jim Sabin and Special Agent Greg Costas found the hit on Cody's that they were looking for. It belonged to Marvin Lee Smith Jr., who was quickly apprehended and sent to Ohio to face allegations of impermissible sexual conduct. Marvin Lee Smith was on bail when he met Jessica Lynn Keene in 1991, having served 9 years in prison for assaulting 2 women in Columbus. Marvin Smith was required to submit his DNA as a formality when he was released from jail after serving time yet again in February. Unfortunately, it was never noted as being related to the Keene case, and it wasn't until Sheriff Sabin and Special Agent Costas had a lucky break that a match to Jessica's killer could be established. Marvin Lee Smith confirmed in court in 2009 that he had abducted Jessica after seeing her by chance at the bus stop on that March day in 1991. This confirmed the police's initial suspicions. To the surprise of the jury, he described how he had indeed pursued Jessica through the dark cemetery before eventually getting a hold of her and killing her with a gravestone, using such force that the stone split into 2. As part of a plea agreement, Smith admitted guilt to first-degree murder while avoiding the death penalty. He will be held at the Lebanon Correctional Institution in Warren County, Ohio, until at least March 2038 after receiving a sentence of 30 years to life in prison. However, those who reside in Columbus and elsewhere will undoubtedly be hoping that this dangerous person stays exactly where he is for life after the revelation of the nightmare murder that he committed. Dallas is a modern city with a cosmopolitan spirit and southern charm. It is widely known for its skyscrapers, upscale shopping, restaurants, and rich cultural life. There are many historic districts, such as the West End, with its late 19th century buildings and futuristic landmarks, shimmering glass towers, and skyscraper spires that serve as the city's main landmarks. Dallas is a city where modern metropolitan life is infused with natural beauty. There are more than 30 parks in different parts of the city. The Gable Park residential complex is located at the epicenter of Dallas Cheek. Living here offers a vibrant, exclusive lifestyle and exquisite, unique experiences. The high-rise building is elegant in appearance and has a parking garage and concierge. It is a vibrant and luxurious apartment building with a landscaped saltwater pool, fitness studio, and gourmet coffee bar in uptown Dallas. It's a quiet and safe place with no crowds of tourists or neighborhood residents strolling by. On September 2, 2015 at 7:42 p.m., a car entered the Gable Park parking lot. The car parked and a beautiful young woman got out. She had a shopping bag in her hands. She slammed the door shut, stepped away from the car, and a minute later, 2 gunshots rang out. With the business completed, the dark figure quickly jumped into a black Jeep Cherokee that pulled up and fled the apartment complex. Local resident Hashim Saad, who was walking to the parking lot to pick up his car, saw the injured woman and called emergency services. Officers arrived at the scene of the tragedy and found the injured woman. Unfortunately, she was already dead. The victim turned out to be 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher. Kendra K. Hatcher was born on February 3, 1980 to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jamison Calley in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois. Her parents divorced, and her mother married Bruce Jamison. She was not an only child. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Kaufman, Ashley Lipscomb, and Melissa Jamison, and 1 brother, Neil Hatcher. She grew up in Police and Plains and studied dentistry there. After her divorce in February 2010, she moved to Dallas, where she began working at Smile Zone Dental Studio. Kendra had a strong Christian faith and wanted to use her dental skills to help others. For example, the clinic provided services to disadvantaged children completely free of charge. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible studies and participated in volunteer programs that included building churches overseas and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. Dallas was welcoming to the young professional. Kendra's professional life quickly gained momentum, and her personal life flourished as well. On May 24, 2015, Kendra began dating Dr. Ricardo Paniagua. Kendra and Ricardo met through a dating app, and from their first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values and interests and wanted the same things in life. Ricardo was finishing his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. And even though they had only been in a relationship for a few months, the young couple was already discussing their upcoming marriage. However, an incident in a parking lot took the life of his beloved woman and cut short all future plans. Investigators who arrived at the scene of the massacre examined the crime scene and initially considered robbery as a motive, as Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. Bullet fragments and a gun magazine were found on the ground next to her body. However, the manner of shooting and the traces of the gunshot pushed the robbery theory into the background. 1 bullet struck the woman in the back and the other in the head. The entry wound from the bullet was at the top of the head and it exited through the chin, indicating that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was confirmed when CCTV footage was obtained and investigators reconstructed a picture of what happened. The footage shows a black Jeep Grand Cherokee pulling into the parking lot at 7:15 p.m. Half an hour later, Kendra returns home and drives into the same. Relisha Rudd was born on October 29, 2005. On March 1, 2014, at the age of 8, she went missing in Washington, D.C. Relisha had been living with her mother and 3 brothers in the D.C. General Shelter, which used to be a hospital, when she was befriended by 51-year-old janitor Khalil Malik Tatum, a former felon who had spent many years in prison. Relisha and Tatum were very close, and her family even described him as her godfather. Relisha was often provided clean clothes by the school staff, and she often talked about the horrible living conditions she endured. She stopped attending school, but it was a month before her absence was reported to police. Officials explained the absences had been excused because Relisha was sick and in the care of Dr. Tatum. After police launched a missing person investigation, they learned Tatum wasn't a doctor at all but was actually the 51-year-old janitor from the D.C. General Family Shelter. Relisha's mother, Shamika, claims that it was her mother, Melissa, who wrote the letters to the school stating she was under the care of Dr. Tatum. Her family all point the finger at one another for the disappearance of Relisha. Tatum spent a lot of time with children at the homeless shelter, especially Relisha, and was often seen with her, taking her to various places such as the movies and buying her gifts. An investigation revealed that the last sighting of her had been weeks prior when she was caught on camera with Tatum at a hotel. In March 2014, the FBI released surveillance footage showing Relisha and Tatum going into a hotel room at a Holiday Inn Express in D.C. on February 26, 2014. The next day, Tatum suspiciously purchased 22-gallon trash bags. Almost a month later, On March 20th, 2014, Tatum's wife, Andrea Tatum, was found deceased from a gunshot wound to the head in a hotel in Prince George's County, Maryland. The couple is seen on video entering the hotel room together the night before. The FBI would then issue an arrest warrant for Tatum for the murder of his wife. In March, searchers found Tatum's body in a shed in the Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens, shot in an apparent suicide. The handgun used in the suicide is the same handgun that was used in his wife's murder. Relish's stepfather, Antonio Wheeler, her mother, Shamika, and her grandmother Melissa, went on the Steve Wilkos talk show. At that point, Antonio and Shamika were no longer together. Shamika told Wilkos that she and her relatives believed Relisha was going to a pool party with Tatum's granddaughter, despite the fact the hotel had no indoor pool. Police would say that the family often let Relisha spend time with the janitor. But Shamika has denied handing her daughter over to Tatum. Instead, Shamika said she was under the impression that her daughter was at her sister's house under the care of her grandmother, Melissa Young. That's why, she claimed, it took so long for the young girl to be reported as missing. Shamika also told Wilkos she had no phone and no means to communicate with her mother and Relisha. When asked by Wilkos what he believed occurred with Relisha's mother, Antonio responded, "I believe she has something to do with it, and also her mother too." Relisha's mother defended Tatum, claiming he was a good man, and said the police told her Tatum was never a suspect. The stepfather, Antonio, and grandmother, Melissa, both took lie detector tests on the show and passed, but Shamika refused to take the test. Antonio has also had fingers pointed at him because he posted pictures with wads of cash in his mouth alongside images of new sneakers and a new cell phone around the time Relisha went missing. The images prompted rumors that the couple sold Relisha to a sex trafficking organization, rumors that Antonio denies and that remain unconfirmed. Investigators believe Relisha is possibly a victim of sex trafficking. A 14-year-old girl from the same homeless shelter had been sex trafficked to Los Angeles. In 2017, the DC police named July 11th as National Relisha Rudd Remembrance Day. Natalie Wilson, co-founder of the Black and Missing Foundation, would say, "We believe that someone has information as to the whereabouts of Relisha. All we need is one person to come forward." Human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States, with hubs in Georgia, Illinois, Texas, and Maryland. According to the National Center for Victims of Crime, most of those kidnapped for the sex trade are U.S. citizens, despite public perception that it typically involves immigrants. As of today, Relisha still remains missing, and the case is unsolved. Lisa Marie Ziegert was born on the 24th of March, 1968 in Holyoke, Massachusetts to George and Diane Ziegert. Lisa grew up in a loving, tight-knit family. She had 3 other siblings named Sharon, David, and Lynn. Lisa and her family were residents of Agawam. While growing up, Lisa had developed a passion for music, which made her learn several musical instruments. In fact, at some point in her life, she joined the school musical groups. After high school, Lisa Ziegert attended Westfield State University, where she studied education and ultimately obtained a teaching degree in the year 1990. She worked as an intern for some time, during which she worked several shifts as a counselor at a kids Lisa loved teaching. She took her profession seriously and was active at it in every way. She had also taught Sunday school at her church. After her internship was over, at the age of 24, Lisa accepted a position as a teacher's assistant at Agawam High School, where she had previously attended as a teenager. There, she worked primarily with a group of kids that had special needs. Lisa had a greater understanding of her students than any other instructor. She was also very professional and worked hard to ensure that every one of her students received the best education possible. Lisa was a very special person. With the kids, she always had a special rapport. They knew that she really liked them and that she treated them like people, Lisa's mom said. In the evenings, after the shift at school was over, Lisa also had a part-time job at the neighborhood Brittany card and gift shop. One fateful Wednesday afternoon on September 15, 1992, was typical for Lisa Ziegert. She had concluded her shift at the school. She left the school building around 4:30 p.m. and drove directly to the card and gift store, where she worked weekdays from 5 to 9 p.m. Her sister, Lynn, briefly dropped by around 5:30 p.m. to keep her company, because Lisa would always complain to her family about how bored, lonely, and scared she feels while at the shop at night. According to Lynn, during her visit to the store, there was no sign of Lisa being in a bad mood. She said her sister was cheerful the whole time that evening, and nothing seemed off. It was easy talk. It was sister talk. It was a little after 6 p.m. when I left. And then I went home and she was fine. You know, she was fine when I left, Lynn said. By the following morning at 8:45 a.m., Sophia Maynard arrived at the card and gift store as usual to open up the store. She was supposed to start working at 9 o'clock. She was shocked to see Lisa's car in the parking lot because she worked at the school in the mornings, so she was not supposed to be in the store when classes were on. Sophia noticed that a light was on inside the store and the door's open sign was visible. At that point, Sophia thought that Lisa might have missed the school morning shift because of the incoming Easter celebration. She and Lisa intended to stuff some balloons for sale during that holiday. When Sophia entered the store, she called Lisa's name multiple times, but she got no answer. I called her name a couple of times and I figured she'd just pop her head out. She didn't. I came behind the counter. All of her things were there. Her drawings, her pocketbook, her car keys. And then I just kind of freaked out, Sophia said. Everything looked strange to Sophia. She felt something was not right. She immediately dashed out the store and ran across the street to a restaurant there and then asked them to call the police. As soon as the police got there, they started inspecting the store. The front of the building appeared to be normal, but the back had a creepy opening, approaching the storeroom at the back. Officers discovered numerous shattered bags that had blood stains on them. They also discovered a number of cards that were scattered across the floor and covered in blood as well. All these indicated a sign of struggle between Lisa Ziegert and her attacker. Additionally, they discovered some tiny dirt by the door that they believed might have been from a shoe trail. Despite all of these evidence, the investigators were unable to locate a useful lead within the store. That morning, Lisa unusually failed to show up at school. The principal called her mother to check if everything was okay with her. But Diane Ziegert had no idea where her daughter was. Her news of disappearance traveled the town of Agawam, and within hours, all of her friends, family, and acquaintances began to do all they can to bring Lisa back home. The police initial strategy to the case was to develop a robbery theory, but that theory was quickly abandoned when they discovered that the perpetrator had not accessed Lisa's wallet or cash register. The goods in the store were also not missing. The second approach the detectives took in the case was to retrace the timeline of what happened the previous evening. They discovered that Lisa's sister had left the shop around 6 o'clock. They also spoke to store owners and neighbors around the card and gift store. It was discovered that Lisa had a conversation with the owner of the carpet shop next door at around 7:20 p.m. They both talked about a critical issue with their local parking lot, which was being used by patrons of the bowling alley. The shop owner then informed her that he would not take the chance of publicly criticizing the drivers who had parked in front of their stores. He claimed that many of them were crazy and dangerous. After about 15 minutes of conversation with Lisa, he left to go home. Police went through the cash register and discovered that the most recent time money had been deposited was 8:20 p.m. Investigators also located a woman who entered the store at about 9 p.m. She said the store's door was opened but nobody came out to attend to her, so she left. Before taking her leave, she claimed to have heard noises coming from the back room. She said it was a banging noise, but she didn't think much of it and decided to leave. The police were able to determine the general time frame of Lisa's disappearance. She finished attending to her last customer at 8:20 p.m. and by 9 o'clock, something had happened to her. The detectives were then left with the questions of what had happened to Lisa Ziegert within those 40 minutes. On the day Lisa was discovered missing, the local police together with the FBI and the Massachusetts State Police carried out a massive search for her. The search party on foot explored the vicinity of the store while the helicopters searched farther off areas. Additionally, police dogs were brought to the store area in an effort to follow Lisa's track. Sadly, none of these produced any favorable outcomes. On 17th of April, 1992, the head of the local police department announced that the case had been reclassified from a missing person case to a kidnapping case. This was done because investigators were confident that Lisa had not left the store of her own free will. 2 days after she vanished, the police were already looking into a kidnapping case. On Easter Sunday, April 19th, all the nearby churches prayed for Lisa Ziegert to be found alive and unharmed. Even though it was Easter, there was no sense of celebration. Around 2 p.m. that same day, a call was made to the police. On the outskirts of the town, close to Route 75, a man was walking his dog. He spotted a woman's body while walking through the wooded area. He immediately alerted the police afterwards. When police arrived, they identified the woman to be Lisa Ziegert. They discovered numerous stab wounds on her neck and legs, which she had sustained from a sharp object. Medical professionals then came to the conclusion that Lisa had also been sexually assaulted. Investigators were able to determine that Lisa's body was dumped 5 kilometers away from the store, which indicated that the offender most likely drove her there in a vehicle. In order to protect any potential evidence, detectives promptly blocked off the area and moved in a single line. At the time, it was raining, and the muddy road was covered in tire tracks. Sadly, the cops were unable to locate the murder weapon or any other concrete proof. The sad news that Lisa Ziegert had been brutally murdered by an unidentified killer immediately went around the city of Agawam. The church where she taught Sunday school on Sundays, in her honor, organized a farewell service. Around 1,000 people attended the service. People said good things about her. Lisa was loved, and the news of her premature demise made residents of the small community of Agawam, who were used to living in peace and safety, experience a mood that was almost panic. Many store owners canceled single shifts and employees escorted one another to their cars at night. Within a matter of days, the self-defense instructors had a lot of students coming in for classes. Also, roughly 300 women filed for a license to possess a gun. The entire community was terrified that an unidentified criminal would attack one of them again. Amidst all these, the FBI and the police were fervently working on the case non-stop. It soon became public knowledge that they had obtained a DNA sample from the crime scene. The DNA sample might have belonged to the murderer. The investigators at some point brought Lisa's boyfriend in for questioning since they suspected him. He, however, had an alibi and the DNA sample from the crime scene did not match his DNA. Additionally, DNA testing was done on Lisa's friends, co-workers, and relatives. And again, no matches were found. Numerous tips were sent to the police by locals. On the night of Lisa's murder, there were several reports of a strange car. Others claimed to know the offender's identity, but detectives weeded out all of these leads since they were dead ends. The police concluded that a van or large SUV had left the tire tracks on the road, close to where the body was discovered. Despite not getting any closer to apprehending the offender after questioning all drivers of similar vehicles, detectives were able to track down a witness who might have seen a similar vehicle that night. At around 9:15 p.m. that night, a worker from a store close by was on her way home. She was at a traffic light when she noticed a sizable SUV pulling off the road and driving in the direction of the spot where Lisa's body would eventually be discovered. Since it was dark outside, the woman was unable to provide more specific details about the car. She merely mentioned that she thought the car included a man and a woman. She also mentioned the peculiar fact that the woman's head was oddly jerking, as if she were dozing off or unconscious when the car pulled into the gravel road. Unfortunately, the information did not help in identifying the suspect. Since then, all leads have been exhausted. Police kept working on the case, but as each month went by, the likelihood of cracking this mysterious case diminished. Before Lisa's family and friends were given another opportunity to learn the truth, an additional year and a half had gone. National television aired an episode about the case in October 1993. The well-liked program featured unresolved case stories that received a ton of attention. This occasionally brought fresh witnesses to the police attention, giving the case new life. Lisa's case was not different. The police received 700 calls from callers with some kind of information within an hour of the broadcast. Most of these leads, as usual, went nowhere, though all of them were looked into by the police. The cops claimed to have found a few worthwhile leads, but they did not say which one. Sadly, it also had little effect. The likelihood of cracking the case significantly decreased with time. The family of Lisa went to tremendous lengths to make sure her legacy was preserved and not forgotten. Despite the early end to Lisa's teaching career, her family had a significant impact on the Agawam's educational system. 3 years after Lisa's murder, in 1995, her parents donated $11,000 specifically to the school's science department, where Lisa worked. These donations were used to support genetics classes and to purchase equipments. Additionally, her parents established a fund for special needs students, which gave them around $35,000 in scholarships. 2002 made it 10 years since Lisa was killed. Still, her mother, Ziegert, held out hope that the case will eventually be solved. She made considerable efforts to preserve her daughter's memories. She partook in every interview and responded to every questions from the media. Each year, she assembled a sizable crowd to light candles in Lisa's memory. In the same period, investigators were fervently working on Lisa Ziegert's case. They only possessed one key piece of evidence at the time, a DNA sample from the alleged murderer. They continued to cross-check the DNA sample against databases of known criminals, in the hopes that the actual suspect would eventually show up, but months turned into years, and the killer would not be found. 24 years after Lisa was savagely murdered, on September 24, 2016, investigators made the decision to take a different approach to the case. They then opted for DNA phenotyping. The basic idea behind it is that specialists can determine a person's supposed portrait and physical characteristics from the data contained in their DNA. For example, with the use of DNA, experts can determine a person's gender, their approximate age, eye color, and hair color, although the portrait created using this data may not always be correct. But occasionally, the coincidence of the portrait matching the face of the real suspect is remarkable. Based on the DNA sample of Lisa's murderer, investigators were able to produce two portraits of the culprit, one at age 25 and the other at age 50. After the photos were released to the public, more than 170 calls were made to the police department. People who made these calls claimed to have seen a similar man. However, the majority of these leads were fruitless. On the 18th of September, 2017, just a year later, police made an unexpected prominent announcement. The offender had been taken into custody. He was identified as Gary Shera, a 49-year-old man. The news of his arrest immediately spread like wildfire throughout the media. Rarely do the police catch the murderer 25 years after the crime was committed. As a result, such stories immediately garner a lot of public interest. The moment Gary Shera was taken into custody, the detectives made public how they had located him. It was discovered that Gary was listed as a suspect in 1993, the year after Lisa was killed. Do you remember that federal television program that resulted in thousands of phone calls with leads for the police? Well, it happened that a Seattle lawyer was one of those callers. At the time, he informed the police that his client might know something about Lisa's death. His client was a woman who was divorcing her spouse at the time. They were residents of Long Meadow, a community close to Agawam. The woman claimed that her husband was displaying more attention to Lisa Ziegert's case at the time. She claimed any time Lisa Ziegert's murder case was being broadcasted on television, her husband would storm into the room and vacantly stare at the television screen, completely oblivious to everyone around him. Her husband, as you may have guessed, was Gary Shera. At the time of Lisa's murder, he was 24 years old and was married with a 1-year-old son. Gary Shera and his wife were always arguing and getting into fights, and soon after the birth of their son, they had already started their divorce process. In 1993, according to the police statement, investigators had already developed the notion that Gary was involved in Lisa's murder, but they couldn't find any proof to back it up. Also, his ex-wife, who provided the information, made the police doubt her testimony. And this is because she had a long history of alcohol abuse in addition to a long list of mental illnesses. Additionally, Gary was granted legal custody of their son after the divorce, but his wife secretly transferred the boy to a different state. It's also crucial to note that this wasn't the first time some wives contacted the police to report that their husbands might have been responsible for Lisa Ziegert's death. There were a lot of calls like that, and the police assumed Gary Shera's case was one of them. Despite all these, at a point, Gary was questioned in an interview, but he claimed not to be involved in Lisa's murder and declined to provide a sample of his DNA. The cops effectively had no other choice since no one could lawfully force him to provide his DNA sample. Detectives later gathered the list of all the males who'd been questioned about the crime, but had declined to provide their DNA sample. Gary Shera made it to the list of suspects, and he was repeatedly requested to be brought in for interrogation at the police station. In 2008, during his third interview, Gary Shera tried hard not to touch anything in the room, not even the table in front of him. A bottle of water was provided for him, but he wouldn't touch it. He gave off the impression that his only thought was how to prevent the police from getting a sample of his DNA. In 2017, investigators compiled a list of 11 suspects, including Gary Shera. Each of them had declined to willingly provide a DNA sample after being interviewed at various points throughout the investigation. In reality, there were a lot more suspects on that list, but due to DNA phenotyping, detectives were able to exclude the wrong men. These men didn't fit some of the traits that experts got from the DNA sample of Lisa's killer. In August of 2017, having been refused many times by the suspects on the list to provide their DNA, investigators had no other choice but to compile all available evidence and go to court. They asked the court for an order requiring all the 11 members on the compiled list of suspects to submit their DNA samples, to which the court granted their request. The cops visited Gary's apartment on Lathrop Street at Westfield Spring on September 13, 2017 to inform him of this order. But Gary wasn't at home. His roommate, with whom they shared the apartment, answered the door. The cops gave him their contact address. They also requested that he promptly pass the information to Gary Shara. The following day, an unexpected event took place. Gary Shara's then-girlfriend called the cops and told them that Gary had left 3 letters in her house. To the investigators' surprise, when they opened the letters, Gary Shara had written in details his confession, a last will and testament, and a brief letter of apology to the Ziegert family. I've never really been or even felt normal. From a very young age, I was fascinated by abduction and bondage. I could never keep it too far from my mind for long. On that fateful day, I let myself do something terrible, Gary Shara wrote. He stated that although he had no intention of killing Lisa, things had apparently spun out of his hands. Gary claimed that he had numerous opportunities to turn himself into the police, but he could not because he was a coward. He claimed that he had endured years of self-hatred. When concluding the letter, he made his intention to end his life known. The cops immediately began looking for Gary Shara, and soon his car was found in the parking lot of a hospital in Stafford Springs. Another suicide note was placed on the windshield. It was soon discovered that Gary had taken some harmful drugs to kill himself, but he immediately got into his car and drove to the closest hospital, where the drugs were flushed out of his body system. After the doctors were done tending to him, Gary Shara was arrested and taken into custody. A search warrant for both his apartment and that of his girlfriend's was simultaneously issued by a judge. The police discovered numerous items that contained his DNA there. When these items were tested for a DNA sample, it was not surprising that Gary Shara was Lisa Ziegert's killer because the DNA found on the items in his home 100% matched the DNA sample found on Lisa Ziegert's body. Aside from this, investigators also had several other potentially important leads. Joyce McDonald Shara, Gary's wife, who had first raised concerns about him in 1993, had sadly passed away in 2014. But investigators were able to locate documents written by her attorney in which the woman provided very disturbing details. One day, Gary had told her bluntly that he wouldn't be able to get intimate with her unless he was holding a knife. The woman called her sister the day after Lisa was killed and revealed that Gary had returned home late that night. She mentioned that his body was covered in scratches, and he seemed very disturbed. Additionally, Gary gave his wife a music box and claimed to have purchased it from the same gift and card store where Lisa worked. But, according to Gary, it was an older woman who actually sold it to him. The issue is that there had never before been such an employee at the store. It is unclear why the police was not informed about all of these details in 1993, and it is impossible to find out now, because the woman who had the information has died. Gary Shara kept declaring his innocence while in custody and refused to admit to his wrongdoings. He most likely acted out of pure fear, but with that much evidence against him, there was no way out for him to get away with his crimes. He only succeeded in delaying his sentence, and that was all. The trial wasn't scheduled to start for another 2 years, but Gary, who had been imprisoned the entire time, decided to confess to his crime. According to Massachusetts law, a defendant facing a first-degree murder charge faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lisa Ziegert's family and friends were in the courtroom. Her mother, Dee Ziegert, who had hoped for a quarter-century to discover the mystery behind her daughter's murder, spoke. She thanked everyone who had been involved in the investigation, as well as the regular caring citizens who had helped and supported her family for so long. Today, Lisa got the justice she deserved. Emotional closure will never be achieved. Every family function will always be one short. Every get-together with friends will be one short, said George Ziegert. Lisa's father, Gary Shara, was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison as a result of his crimes. Finally, one of the longest-running criminal cases in the state of Massachusetts was eventually resolved and officially closed. The case of Alex Murdaugh. Alex Murdaugh attempted to follow in his family's footsteps by pursuing a law degree from the University of North Carolina, where he met his future wife, Margaret Maggie Branton. They started dating in 1991 and got married 2 years later on August 14, 1993 at the Second Presbyterian Church in South Carolina. Alex and Maggie had 2 sons, Richard Buster Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh. Alex joined his family's law firm, PMPD, as a personal injury attorney, aiming to continue his family's legacy. However, unlike his ancestors, Alex misused the power and influence his family's firm provided, covering up financial crimes, theft, and possibly even murder. For over a decade, Alex's dishonest dealings went unnoticed until his youngest son, Paul, was involved in a fatal boating accident. This incident was the latest in a series of suspicious deaths surrounding the Murdaugh family, leading people to speculate that these accidents were not coincidental and were instead part of a larger cover-up, given the family's history and resources. Here's what happened on February 23, 2019. Paul Murdaugh, fresh out of high school, took his family's boat to Pucas Island for a party with friends. The group, including his girlfriend, Morgan Dowie, Anthony Cook, and Miley Allman, wanted an unsupervised night of fun. They planned a house party and oyster roast on the island. To make the night complete, Paul used his older brother's ID to buy beer and hard liquor. They left the Myrtle River house around 7 p.m. and continued partying until midnight. Feeling restless, Paul suggested driving the boat to downtown Beaufort, where he and his friend Connor had 2 rounds of shots at around 1 a.m. As they headed back to the boat, a surveillance camera caught a tender moment between Anthony and Mallory. Paul, who was heavily intoxicated, started acting strangely on a boat ride with friends. At 1:15 a.m., the group got back on the water, but things quickly spiraled out of control. Paul drove the boat in circles, showing signs of intoxication, and got into an argument with the others. Anthony wanted to get out on a nearby rock, but Paul refused. GPS footage later showed that the boat's speed increased at some point. Although Paul denied deliberately speeding up, he was in control of the wheel. The boat crashed into Urua Creek Bridge at 2:20 a.m., throwing Mallory into the water. The others were severely injured. Connor broke his jaw, and Morgan's hand was badly hurt. Connor called 911, and help arrived soon after. When the deputy sheriff arrived, he saw blood in the main compartment and a large split in the hull from the impact. All the teenagers involved were extremely drunk, and everyone except Anthony required hospital treatment. Paul refused treatment despite being extremely agitated and having a blood alcohol level of 0.243, significantly higher than the legal limit. The search for Mallory's body took 8 days, and she was found to have died from a combination of blunt force trauma to the head and drowning. Despite multiple eyewitnesses stating that Paul was out of control while driving the boat, he was not arrested or charged. This led to rumors that Alex Murdaugh had used his influence to protect his son from justice. In March 2019, the Murdaugh family was served with a wrongful death lawsuit. Mallory's family alleged that Paul's mother, Maggie, was aware that her son was drunk when they went boating and that Buster had helped them obtain fake IDs to buy alcohol. Paul was finally charged with 3 felonies on April 18, 2019, but he never made it to court because he died before his trial. A series of mysterious deaths have been linked to the Murdaugh family. One incident involved Stephen Smith, a gay teenager, who was found dead on July 8, 2015. His official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, and it was initially ruled a hit-and-run incident with no suspect arrested. However, Stephen's mother believed he was the victim of a hate crime. There were rumors that Stephen was in a relationship with Alex Murdaugh's oldest son, Buster, and that Buster might have been involved in Stephen's death. Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh family's longtime housekeeper, died on February 26, 2018 due to complications from a severe head injury. Alex Murdaugh claimed that his dogs had caused her to trip and fall, but there was no autopsy to confirm this account. The case was reopened on March 22, 2023, and it was revealed that Gloria's death was a murder, although no suspects have been named. Alex Murdaugh's family was involved in a wrongful death lawsuit after his housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, died in 2018. The lawsuit resulted in a $4,300,000 insurance policy settlement, but the money never reached Satterfield's sons. Instead, Murdaugh allegedly conspired with his friend Corey Fleming, a lawyer and godfather, to one of Murder's sons to steal the payout. The money was diverted to Murder's bank account, and the Satterfield family was never notified. Satterfield's sons filed a new civil lawsuit against Murdaugh in September 2021. On the same day, state investigators opened a criminal investigation into Satterfield's death, citing inconsistencies in the coroner's report. The Satterfield family allowed authorities to exhume Satterfield's body for further investigation. Meanwhile, Murdaugh was facing numerous financial and embezzlement charges. He was allegedly involved in a money laundering and painkiller ring with his distant cousin Curtis Smith, which lasted from 2013 to 2021. On September 4, 2021, Murdaugh orchestrated a scheme in which Smith shot him in an attempt to collect a $10 million life insurance policy. However, the bullet only caused superficial injuries, and Murdaugh was able to call 911 himself. Days later, Murdaugh confessed to the scheme and was charged with insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and filing a false police report. He surrendered himself and was taken into 2 days later. He announced his resignation from his family's law firm and entered rehab. However, it was soon revealed that Murdaugh had misappropriated $792,000 from his law firm. His law license was indefinitely suspended in September 2021. Investigators continued to uncover numerous financial crimes, tax evasions, and embezzlements committed by Murdaugh. After leaving rehab, Murdaugh was arrested again and charged with 2 felony counts of obtaining property by false pretenses. He was denied bond and later indicted on 27 counts of financial misconduct, accused of stealing money from clients, lawyers, and the Satterfield family. Alex Murdaugh faced additional charges on December 9, 2021, with 21 new counts added to the existing 27, bringing the total to 48. The charges included forgery, money laundering, computer crimes, breach of trust, and obtaining signature or property by false pretenses. It was estimated that Murdaugh had stolen over $6,200,000 from his victims. The state's investigation into his business dealings took months, with new charges emerging almost daily. By June 2022, the charges against him had risen to 81, and by the time he was formally disbarred on July 13, 2022, he faced 84 criminal charges and 11 lawsuits. One of the victims' mothers filed a legal claim against the estates of Margaret and Poor Murder, raising questions about the character of the once prominent attorney. Could he be hiding something even more sinister, such as the murder of his wife and son? What could have been his motive? The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLARD, revisited the double murder case, considering new information gathered during the investigation into Murdaugh's financial crimes. They discovered that Alex and Maggie Murdaugh's marriage was troubled, and Maggie was living apart from her husband at their beach home on Edisto Island. Maggie's sister, Marion Proctor, told law enforcement that Maggie had not planned to see Alex on the night of the murders. Alex had asked Maggie to meet him at the family's hunting lodge, where she and her younger son were later found shot dead near the dog kennels. Alex claimed to have taken a long nap before leaving to visit his ailing mother, who suffered from dementia. He stated that he was away for 45 minutes to an hour and a half and found his wife and son dead upon his return. However, law enforcement suspected that Alex's timeline was questionable and lacked a clear motive for the murders. The investigation revealed that weeks before the murder, the state grand jury had subpoenaed Alex Murdaugh's finances, which threatened to expose his financial wrongdoings. Additionally, his law firm had discovered his misappropriation of company funds, and he was confronted about it on June 7, 2021, the day of the murder. State authorities believed that the financial pressure had pushed Alex to hatch a plan to divert attention from his crimes and garner sympathy in the public eye. 13 months after the fatal shooting, Alex Murdaugh was charged with the murders of his wife and son. The prosecutor alleged that Murdaugh had shot and killed his wife and son at close range with a shotgun and an AR-style rifle. The murder weapons were never found. Murdaugh's defense team argued that 2 shooters were involved due to the different weapons used. Expert witness testimony suggested that the shooter was likely between 5'2" and 5'4" tall, which ruled out Alex Murdaugh as a suspect due to his 6'4" height. However, under cross-examination, the expert admitted that there were other possible explanations for the bullet trajectory beyond the shooter's height. The investigation revealed that Maggie was shot with 300 blackout ammunition from an AR-style rifle, and a box of this ammo was found at the Murdaugh family estate. Prosecutors argued that Alex killed his wife and son to gain sympathy and avoid accountability for his financial crimes. Alex's lawyers countered that this didn't make sense as it would only shift attention to himself and put him in the spotlight of a murder investigation. Alex was a person of interest from the start of the investigation, but his lawyer claimed he had an ironclad alibi for the night of the murders and no motive to kill his family. Prosecutors presented 2 videos taken on the night of the murder, which appeared to show Alex wearing different shirts. The Snapchat video taken from Paul's phone showed Alex wearing a blue shirt, while the body cam footage showed him wearing a different shirt. Investigators couldn't find the blue shirt, and prosecutors suggested Alex tried to influence a key witness's account of what he was wearing. Cell phone data and testimony from Alex's mother's caregiver confirmed that Alex was only at his mother's home for 15 to 20 minutes, contradicting his claim of staying for 45 minutes to an hour and a half. The most crucial piece of evidence was a video found on Paul's phone recorded at 8:44 p.m., just minutes before the murders. The video featured the voices of Paul, Maggie, and Alex, placing Alex at the scene of the crime. This contradicted his previous alibi and confirmed his presence at the dog kennels where the murders occurred. Alex testified that he didn't shoot his wife or son, but admitted to lying about his alibi. Alex Murdaugh changed his story, claiming that his opioid addiction and resulting paranoia led him to lie to law enforcement. However, prosecutors argued that Murdaugh fabricated this excuse after murdering his wife and son. They believed he used his wife's phone to create an alibi by making calls and sending texts, including "Call me, babe," at 9:47 p.m. Phone data showed that Murdaugh's and his wife's phones locked simultaneously, and Alex's phone recorded a sudden increase in steps around the time of the murder. Prosecutors suggested this was evidence of him trying to hide or dispose of evidence, but his lawyers disputed this, pointing out that the step patterns on Alex's phone did not match his wife's. The decisive evidence came from a video recorded at the dog kennels. After deliberating for just 3 hours, the jury found Murdaugh guilty on all counts on March 2, 2023. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. Additionally, he received a 5-year sentence for possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Murdaugh pleaded guilty to 22 financial crimes as part of a deal, but maintains his innocence in the murders. He appealed his conviction on March 9, 2023. In a surprise move, his lawyers filed a motion for a new trial, alleging that Rebecca Hill, a court clerk, had engaged in jury tampering. Hill denies the allegations, which include advising jurors to disregard Murdaugh's testimony and other defense evidence, pressuring them to reach a quick guilty verdict and misrepresenting critical information to the trial judge. A hearing is scheduled for Murdaugh's lawyers to present evidence and witnesses to support their claim. However, a judge has not yet been assigned to preside over the hearing. With over 100 financial and drug crime charges pending, as well as multiple lawsuits, it is clear that the Alex Murdaugh case is far from over. 21-year-old Heather Ann Wilms lived in an apartment in Leon Valley, Texas in 2005. On February 22nd, Heather's friends got concerned when they could not reach her. The friends entered her apartment through a sliding glass door, and everyone's worst fears were realized as they found Heather's body in her bedroom. Heather's hands had been severed. Her clothes were burned in an apparent effort to conceal evidence. It was also determined that she had been assaulted. Neighbors of Heather's told police they heard her arguing with a man the previous day. They described shuffling sounds and then silence at 5 a.m. in the morning. Investigators questioned a lot of people close to Heather. One of those people was Jose Baldemiro Flores. He went to high school with her and stayed in touch afterwards. Flores was also one of the last to see her alive. Flores denied any involvement, and the DNA collected from Heather's body that belonged to the suspect was not strong enough to match to anyone. 6 years later, in 2011, 30-year-old Esmeralda Herrera's life was taken in a similar fashion to Heather's. She lived in San Antonio, Texas. Her body was found tied to her bed on March 2nd. She had been bludgeoned and strangled. Another fire had been set in an attempt to conceal evidence. This time, set in multiple places and large enough that firefighters arrived to put down the blaze. A month after Esmeralda's life was taken, Jose Flores was arrested in connection with her case. The charges against him were dropped a month later. A request to further investigate the case was denied. In 2015, then District Attorney Nico LaHood decided to take another look. Then, in December 2016, Flores was again arrested. This time he was charged with taking the lives of Heather and Esmeralda. DNA linked him to both cases. According to San Antonio officials, the pandemic slowed down the pace of court proceedings considerably. In early 2022, District Judge Melissa Skinner decided that all sides had waited long enough. But then, on the eve of jury selection for the trial, Flores took responsibility. The 41-year-old Flores was then sentenced to 3 separate life sentences. Heather's mother Donna Ellis had this to say during a victim impact statement, read during the sentencing. "I forgive you." On Sunday, September 15, 2019, 2 fishermen were engaged in their daily work near the aqueduct, the Neuquén province's breakwaters in Argentina. The Lime River was approached by them on the same day. They remained composed until they witnessed something that was beyond their understanding when the water floated the remains of a young girl's body, specifically limbs and a skull. Frustrated, the fishermen contacted authorities who quickly arrived at the scene. Laura Lopez, a young girl from Claudia, was quickly recalled by officers, had been missing for less than 3 days. Her physical form was not familiar. The police were unsure of her identity and continued their search in the area to discover any indications of the victim's identity. In the same river, they came across a torn-up fabric bag, tights, and shoes undergarments. It was evident that the girl had been a victim of sexual assault, not just murder. The police contacted Laura's relatives after finding the clothing and inquired if they knew about it, would be able to spot it. The officers were unaware that the investigation would uncover the truth about the case. The method used to commit the crime was even more gruesome than what had been initially suspected. Platier, Argentina, was the birthplace of Laura Lopez on November 11, 2000. Her elder sisters, Melissa and Demaris, who were 18 years old when she was born, loved her from the first day. Laura's mother passed away when she was only 3 years old, and all 3 siblings were left as orphans under the care of their father. Despite his initial efforts to provide for the family, the father eventually became addicted to alcoholism. A few years later, despite the challenges she faced, Laura was known for her sweet and loving nature. That's why her sister began referring to her as Cielo, a nickname that everyone who knew her would call her. She was referred to by her. The girl's father was laid off years later, necessitating them to find more work. At 18 years old, Cielo began vending fried pastries during the day. She went to high school in the evening, and during her free time from studying, she spent doing something else, ensure the well-being of her nieces and nephews. At the onset of her schooling, she had aspirations of finding a good job to restore her financial stability. A sense of stability has been bestowed upon her family. Unluckily, something took place that prevented this from happening. Cielo and Demarest spent the entire day on September 12, 2019 drinking tea with each other. Demarest finished renovating the house. Her sister joked that she had never made tea like her before. Either way, it's a good thing. It was a pleasant day. Cielo later attended school where her peers observed something sporadic about the routine. She chose to sit at the back of the class instead of her usual spot and left after 20 minutes, the conclusion of the lesson. A friend greeted Cielo as he returned home at approximately 11:30 p.m. They spent some time conversing, drinking a few drinks, and taking selfies for social media. At 3 a.m., they said their goodbyes and Cielo admitted to feeling tired, but having a plan for the future to go to sleep. A message was sent by Melissa to Lisa the next day inquiring if she had sought medical attention for her ear issues. She was unresponsive, anxious. Melissa contacted Demaris to inquire about Cielo's presence, which led to concern, the sisters of Cielo. She was nowhere to be found, and her phone was switched off. They contacted the police as they found no evidence of her presence for several hours. They were informed at the police station that they had to wait for 48 hours from the last news item. Cielo was last seen by them before they filed a missing person report. The officers speculated that she might have had a boyfriend as it was believed to be common. Adolescents encountering a situation. Saturday was characterized by the absence of life to Cielo. The report was only accepted by the police at that point, leading to a search. Sadly, it was already too late. The Lemay River's breakwater area was the location where 2 fishermen were working on Sunday the 15th. Platier is just 15 kilometers away from where Cielo calls home. They remained composed until they encountered something that caught their attention. A young girl's body, including limbs and a skull, was said to be found floating in the water. They promptly informed the authorities about this. Upon arrival, the officers observed that the brutality had been extinguished with great force. The body is the subject of discussion. It was apparent that the person in question had a thorough understanding of knives. The search for clues in the area was ongoing with detectives still searching for any leads. The individual affected, a fabric bag, leggings, and underwear were discovered in the same river, but completely destroyed. They came across 2 rings while conducting their search. Finally, officers searched the riverbed and found a blood-stained knife. Cielo's family was soon referred to by them. Damaris spotted the attire upon her arrival at the location, and without hesitation, she took action. Without hesitation, she confirmed that it was her sister's property. The fishermen discovered Laura Lopez's limbs and skull in the shallow waters downstream from where they accidentally found her. The discovery of a young woman's body in Lemay River was made by firefighters around 11:30 on Monday. It had already been entrusted to the Forensic Expert Corps for examination. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Carlos Cordillo. He ascertained that the death was caused by a severe blow to the head leading to internal bleeding, a throbbing of the brain. A blow to the back of her head caused her to become unconscious. Cielo endured 2 to 4 hours of agony. She could have survived if she had been treated properly. Furthermore, her arms were found to have bruises, indicating that she had been beaten and had some facial trauma, struggled her way towards the attacker. Cielo's sister's fears were validated by the forensic expert. The discovery of intimate wounds on her body was a clear indication of sexual assault. He also said that the recognizable marks of cuts on her neck, arms, and legs mentioned that the culprit had a history of approaching on kitchen knives. The assailant's lack of medical or anatomical knowledge was emphasized, which further intensified the problem. The roster of suspects. The detectives were unaware of the individual accountable for this terrible crime. After 3:00 a.m. on Friday, they analyzed Cielo's mobile phone and discovered that it was lost. Her contact had been with a man named Alfredo Emilio Escobar, a mechanic by profession. He was 28 years old. He and Cielo were both students in high school, and he had a passion for hunting and fishing, inspiringly enabling him to wield a knife. The distance between the girl's home and his house was 2.5 kilometers and/or 20 blocks, which made it convenient. The reception of signals from the antennas is potent. The girl was contacted by this person 4 times on September 13th at 3:16, 3:22, and 3:36 a.m. The man. At that point, the antennas established that they were both at home. Then both mobiles were activated in the vicinity of the girl's abode. The phone of Cielo headed towards the city center and arrived at Escobar's residence by 5 a.m. The girl's WhatsApp story featured an alien emoji, and her phone was still being tracked down. The man's dwelling was where I found him. At 5:52 a.m., the girl's mobile phone ceased to function. There was no communication from her thereafter. The records also indicated that Escobar had not re-entered his cell phone until 11:05 p.m. the following day. A day back. In Chino Muerta, where Cielo was hiding, the antenna of a nearby telephone pole detected a phone during this time. Subsequently, the remains were uncovered. Escobar came back home at 12:05 p.m. on September 15th. The video was captured by 13 cameras, which cover both city cameras and private residences. The stores were also examined. 2 individuals whose names were revealed were shown in specific recordings from the early morning of September 13th. The physical features were reminiscent of those of Cielo and Escobar. The young girl's mobile phone was in a state of mobility at the same time. Escobar was the only suspect in this case without a doubt. This man was recognized by one of the agents during the investigation. He reminisced about encountering him on Highway 22 a year ago, which was the way they were crossing to meet up with their families, the towns of Nuquin and Plaudier. A patrol car was hit by a young man who had been driving at velocities of over 80 kilometers per hour. The hour is a crucial one. He refused to be arrested, and a lawsuit was brought against him. Escobar was on the brink of going to court for that incident, but now the charges were completely different. The situation is distinct and has a greater gravity. At 8:30 a.m. on September 17th, a police patrol was present at the scene, which was roughly 30 meters away from Escobar's residence, had been working diligently. A young man who looked like the suspect was spotted driving away from a Fiat Ducato minibus that they had observed. Exited. He was immediately recognized by the police based on his physical attributes, including his face shape, facial features, and hairstyle. He entered the house and later emerged with 2 adults around 60 years old. The trio got into a vehicle heading towards Highway 22 without any suspicion. Police chased the vehicle for a while and found it stopped in an area of nowhere. The zone is situated roughly 30 meters away from a bridge that connects New Cane and Cipolletti. The elderly man and Escobar exited the vehicle simultaneously. The police proceeded to ask for identification. Escobar was accompanied by his father and another man while his mother was in the car. It was evident that they were attempting to escape the city. The young man did not hesitate to undergo the procedure, but was visibly anxious. Shortly after, Escobar was brought to the police station, and his vehicle was seized. Following that, he was subjected to a medical examination. The examination revealed swollen areas on the knuckles of his right hand's fingers, consistent with the use of a punching hand. He sustained cuts and bruises on the palm of his right hand. Cielo's death occurred on the same day as a few days before. These findings led to Escobar being charged with the rape and murder of the girl. Despite his request to remain silent, he was detained in custody for 6 months. There was a fear that he might escape or interfere with the investigation. On September 1st, the first search warrant was issued at the Estrada Street residence, the location where the Escobar family made their home. The property was sizable, incorporating a construction site and 2 buildings in the back. Upon entering the sleeping area where Escobar was present, officers discovered fingerprints on the walls. The use of luminol to check them resulted in the discovery of bloodstains. A cloth stained with blood was also found by officers during the search. The situation worsened as they walked to the building that was behind the residence. Crumpled vegetation was found to have blood spots. Blood was also present on the gates, the right handle of a cart, and on one end of an infrared emitting device, a device. It was in this place that the blow that caused Cielo's death occurred, as could be seen. The search team found blood stains at the location and then examined samples for comparison. The blood of the girl and Escobar was present. The fluid found on Cielo's body was also examined through DNA analysis. The lawyer representing Escobar stated that rape charges should not be brought up until the outcome is determined. We were seized. Nonetheless, the outcomes were achieved in a short time frame. The Ministry of Health Central Laboratories scrutinized the samples collected during the outbreak. The victim and accused genetic profiles are matched in the search. At the time of his arrest, Escobar was wearing sneakers, and a knife was discovered at the river's bottom. They were also examined. Cielo was found to have DNA matching on both items. The victim's genital area was examined using 3 swabs. Escobar's DNA was compatible with one of them. As a result, investigators could already be certain that this individual had sexually assaulted the victim. The girl was killed, dismembered, and disposed of the corpse. The confirmation was made by law enforcement officials during a press conference on September 21st. Prosecutor Juan Agustin Garcia said he believed Escobar was guilty of the crime. He accused Cielo of murdering him to cover up his rape and stated that he could be prosecuted in the event of a guilty verdict, could be sentenced to life in prison. Similar to this, more evidence was still required. Technology played a significant role in Escobar's discovery. Even though he did not plead guilty, the court ordered the seizure of his mobile phone, and he was required to furnish the access code. Scrutiny. Despite having Cielo as one of his contacts, it was discovered that he had removed her from the conversation on the night, the disappearance of her. The victim's call history was deleted by him, but their social security number was not removed. Dialogues with the media. The suspect's actions on September 11, 1213 were also revealed during the investigation. Visited the social media site to check out pictures shared by Cielo. Escobar maintained his innocence despite the evidence against him. Nevertheless, the evidence indicated that he was accountable for the murder. Ultimately, a conclusion was reached concerning the events that transpired on the night of the crime. On September 12, 2019, Cielo departed from school at approximately 8 p.m. After spending time with a friend, she stated that she was tired and would go to sleep. Sleeping is the purpose of this. She was contacted by Escobar at 3:40 in the morning, and they started a conversation. She and him were not friends, but she agreed to meet him, and they went back to his house. The events that occurred inside the house remained unanswered. Nonetheless, the research indicates that Cielo refrained from having personal encounters with Escobar. In a fit of rage, he sexually assaulted her. He took his own life out of fear that she might report him to the authorities. He escorted her to the backyard, hitting her on the head twice. Cielo was alive at that point, and Escobar acted cruelly by hiding her body for several hours. In order to avoid being caught unawares, he also shut down his phone. Cielo's body had been lying in the shed for almost a day, and she passed away due to the injuries. The body was dismembered with a sharp knife that Besh Cabot had hidden in his kitchen. He loaded the body parts into his Fiat Ducato minibus and drove for 15 kilometers to reach his destination, the area where the breakwaters are located. He came back to the location and turned on his phone feeling relieved and contemplating. The conclusion was reached. This case has become a public concern for the entire city. Mnuchin has strongly denounced the accused. The statement was met with a range of responses. Some people sympathized with her situation, while others accused her of complicity. In the midst of these assaults, the girl requested that Cielo and her team remain attentive. Her family is a part of it. Melissa subsequently got in touch with Escobar's sister, expressed her gratitude for the message, and requested an explanation. It's time for people to cease attacking the girl since she has no history of harm. The criminal case was immediately pursued by the prosecution. The initial court proceedings were conducted in the Provincial Legislative Assembly. According to the Newcomb prosecutor, Escobar was fully responsible for his actions. The girl was allegedly killed through gender-based violence in addition to other charges, the act of rape. In the same hearing, professionals who were involved in the examination of the attire discovered in that case. The river, in conjunction with the remains and evidence found in the man's house, provided their testimonies. Florencia, Cielo's closest friend, was the most unexpected. She stated that Escobar had been sending messages to the victim for several months inviting her to join him, to socialize and enjoy a drink. Despite this, they had never met before. She stated that she had been acquainted with him for 5 years and was aware that he didn't have it. A highly commendable standing. Parties at Escobar's house had been a regular occurrence over the years. The house was strewn with alcohol and psychoactive substances. Intimate liaisons were openly shared by couples. According to Florencia, she had advised her friend against dating Escobar on multiple occasions. The girl consistently replied with a refusal to respond. and an inability to reply to his messages. The defense questioned why she had not suggested blocking Escobar's number. In response, Florencia stated that her friend had made the decision, and she didn't want to dictate anything. Her life. They exhibited the girl's surveillance camera footage while she was on the stand. The day that Cielo went missing, they exhibited her a recording from EAR at 4:00 a.m., which showed 2 individuals standing on opposite sides of the screen, individuals heading towards the central district of the city. Florencia reluctantly acknowledged that it was Cielo. She affirmed that her sneakers, jacket, and walking style were unmistakable. The girl also recognized Escobar. The testimony of Escobar's friend exposed his impulsiveness as the judge accused him of infidelity. His behavior was marked by substance abuse and womanizing tendencies. His ex-partner was also present in court. According to her, their relationship ended in a negative way many years ago. She reported him to the authorities as she believed he had burglarized her home and stolen money. When she reached out to him to ask for the money back, he ran after her friend who was with her. The defendant attempted to defend himself after examining the testimonies. Escobar pointed to his friend who sold him illegal substances as the actual offender, the offense committed. That night, I was in a state of unconsciousness. My admission is that I have committed the act of removing blood and discarding it. He stated to the local media that he had not committed murder. According to him, he was intoxicated that evening, and this individual was also under the influence of drugs in his residence with Cielo. After hearing a scream from one of the rooms, Escobar immediately went to investigate what had taken place. The blood was visible and he proceeded to clean it up. He aided his friend in disguising the body. He expressed gratitude towards them for allowing him to share his supposed story at the end. The truth is what matters most. Despite the lack of evidence, this statement was not validated. Escobar was the lone suspect. The prosecutor stated in his closing argument that this man exploited the fact that they betrayed the victim's trust by being somewhat familiar with her. He orchestrated the cruelness of his behavior and the gruesome method of disposing of the remains. Alfredo Emilio Escobar received a unanimous verdict after the jury deliberated for only 40 minutes, convicted of raping and murdering Laura Cielo Lopez, aged 18. The charge that the latter one was brought up was made worse because it was aimed at hiding the attack. The issue of gender violence was a part of it. Due to these reasons, he was given a life sentence with no chance of release. The Cielo Lopez law, which was passed by the new Quinn provincial government, has been in effect since then. Strive to eradicate violence against women. All ages, including students and teachers, are required to receive training on gender violence. Fortunately, he was not forgotten, and a life sentence is reassuring. The victim cannot be brought back to life by involving society and the family, as per Marcelo Henriques, the family's lawyer in Velasco. August 12, 2019 started out completely normal. Teacher's assistant, Lindsay Burbeck, was on vacation, and she planned to spend the day with her family. She and her daughter, Sarah, went shopping in Blackburn in the afternoon, and then they agreed to have a nice family evening over a cup of tea and meet her daughter's human boyfriend. They said goodbye, and Lindsay returned home to change and go for her daily walk in the woods. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she left the house and never came back. To delve into the sudden disappearance and try to figure out why this particular day's tragedy happened and who was to blame. The events are set in the town of Blackburn in the county of Lancashire in northwest England. The town is located in the southern part of the county on the Blackburn River by the Leeds-Liverpool Canal at the junction of April 2018, but they continued to live together in Upton until March 2019. She then moved to her new home on Burnley Road in Hancote. Lindsay cared for her 2 adult children, Vivian, 20, and Sarah, 17. She worked as an upper-grade teacher's aide at Hill Elementary School in Burnley and loved being surrounded by children. Lindsay was a talented artist who would go the extra mile to create the most amazing props for school productions and plays. On the fateful day of August 12th, She went for a walk in a wooded area known as Coppice near her home in the village of Hancote on the outskirts of Accrington and disappeared. At the appointed time, Sarah and her boyfriend Brandon arrived at Lindsay's home, but no one answered the door. Sarah became worried as it was out of character for her mother to forget a scheduled tea party. She tried several times to contact Lindsay, but no one answered the phone. Sarah then sent her a text message that read, "Where are you? We sat outside for an hour and called 6 times. After receiving no response, Sarah sent another text message with a series of question marks, but again received no response. After waiting outside Lindsay's house for an hour, Sarah called her father, Tim Bubeck, to let him know her mom wasn't home and wasn't answering her phone. Tim took a frightened Sarah and Brandon back to his house. Near midnight, Sarah and Tim headed to Lindsay's house again, but with a set of spare keys. To their dismay, she never showed up. Inside, the house seemed quite ordinary and showed no signs of any incident. There was no note of explanation either. At 12:11 a.m. on the night of August 13th, Tim Bubeck contacted police and told the dispatcher, "My ex-wife seems to be missing. We can't find her. It doesn't look like her." Lindsay Burbeck was reported missing. Lindsay's disappearance shook up the community. The people of the small suburb banded together and went out in search of the woman. There were hundreds of people, men and women, grandparents and people walking dogs, teenagers with bicycles, and even moms with strollers. To most, Lindsay was a stranger, but that didn't matter. After days of desperate searches, social media appeals, and posters, people still gathered at Coppice for 2 consecutive days in the hope of finding a vital clue that could solve the mystery of Lindsay Burbeck's disappearance. After several days of fruitless searching, it was clear to everyone that the search was going to be difficult. With each passing day, the chances of finding Lindsay alive dwindled. Detectives classified Lindsay Burbeck as high risk. She had never gone missing before, and her family described the disappearance as very uncharacteristic of her. Nevertheless, the search did not stop for a moment. Locals printed thousands of posters to distribute throughout the neighborhood, while a Facebook group associated with the search quickly grew to 10,000 members. A few hours after the police appeal was posted online, the first posters with Lindsay's face on them could be seen all over the neighborhood. Within a couple of days, there wasn't a lamppost, storefront, or traffic light that didn't have a poster calling for the search for Lindsay. Police launched an investigation into the disappearance from the house as extensive searches were carried out by specialist police officers, dog handlers, Lancashire Fire and Rescue Service, mountain rescue volunteers, and the city's search and rescue team. Drones and helicopters were also deployed to search the area covering Coppice and the surrounding open countryside for a considerable distance, including popular walking and running routes. For days after Lindsay's disappearance, Lancashire police released CCTV footage showing when she was last seen alive, walking along Burnley Road at 4:10 in the afternoon towards Coppice. She was wearing a purple jacket, black leggings, and dark sneakers with white soles. A week had passed since her disappearance on August 19th, and with each passing day, there was less and less hope of finding Lindsay Burbeck alive. Police were still no closer to the whereabouts of the mother of 2, but emphasized that there was no evidence that she was the victim of a criminal act, meaning there was still a chance of finding her alive. The search moved to Accrington Cemetery. He yelled, "Accrington Cemetery." He yelled and called her name several times, but the dog didn't respond. The dog hid its head in the bushes, sniffing and trying to dig for something. The dog's owner walked over to him, stood next to him, and was horrified to find that there was something very soft under his feet. He was frightened and jumped back. Then he smelled a horrible odor and saw flies swirling around. A plastic bag and something that looked like a foot were visible from the ground. On August 24th, 12 days after Lindsay Burbeck disappeared, her body was found under the most horrific circumstances, buried in a cemetery. The naked body, wrapped in 2 clear plastic bags mixed with earth and grass, was placed across a shallow grave. The search for Lindsay Burbeck was considered complete. A murder investigation was officially launched. Pathologist Dr. Naomi Carter, after conducting an autopsy, determined that death was due to a broken neck. The trauma was inflicted with such force that the entire larynx had crushing injuries. The neck was most likely struck with a foot or knee. An attempt to cut off Lindsay's right leg after death was also determined, possibly with a saw, as tine marks were found. A large laceration was found on the leg, which had been cut down to the bone. The injuries Lindsay suffered were catastrophic. Dr. Carter also reported that due to the poor condition of the body, it was quite difficult to determine the victim's injuries, but she did not rule out any sexual activity on the day of her disappearance. which could not be ascertained due to the level of decomposition of the body. Prior to the discovery of Lindsay's body, members of the public and police had searched the same area for several days without success. Community volunteers and a police dog handler reported seeing a blue wheelie garbage can abandoned in bushes nearby. However, at this stage of the investigation, no one was yet aware of the significance of the can. Volunteers who searched the cemetery at 9 p.m. on August 20th also found the same dumpster with a dark stain on the outside and thought it might be blood. After taking pictures of the dumpster, they called the police. 2 police officers arrived on the scene to inspect it and found a brown mark that they thought was dirt. The police said the dumpster looked brand new and there was no evidence at the time to link it to Lindsay's disappearance. Therefore, it was left in place. There were other important clues found in the cemetery that were not immediately accepted. For example, a local resident, Christine Alderson, discovered a bloody cloth on the grass at the cemetery on August 18th, while she and her daughter were walking their dogs. She said the blood on the cloth was fresh and red, but thought it might have belonged to a homeless man who frequented the area. Another woman who walks dogs, Judith Bibby, reported seeing red clothing hanging on a barbed wire fence near the Cargill Hill Trail that was probably Lindsay's jacket. She also heard a voice, presumably a child's, but heard no struggle, yelling, or screaming. On August 25th, investigators revisited the crime scene and found a yellow-handled saw and a pair of green heavy-duty gloves near Lindsay's grave that had several traces of blood. The evidence was taken for forensic testing, and it came back positive. The gloves contained the perpetrator's DNA on the inside surfaces, and Lindsay's DNA was found on the outside surface of the left glove. A pair of her Skechers sneakers, which had been cut along the sole, were also found in a blue plastic bag discarded in the cemetery. Examination of other evidence revealed that Lindsay's body was wrapped in some kind of plastic sheeting, and between the body and the sheeting was foliage and grass that was not from the cemetery grounds. This led investigators to believe that the body had been moved from another location. That's when detectives remembered a blue trash can that had repeatedly caught the attention of volunteers. Police officers studying the CCTV footage soon made a startling discovery that left the investigation team baffled. Several images showed a young man pulling a blue wheelie garbage can in the Burnley Road area. Over the next few days, a CCTV camera captured a certain guy returning to the cemetery 4 times. Thanks to that footage, a suspect emerged. The video of a young guy carrying a trash can down the street, possibly with Lindsay's body, became a sensation. The video was shown on the news with a plea for help identifying the man, and it worked. The boy was identified by shocked teachers and parents. The teen surrendered to police the same day. His name was withheld until sentencing due to his age. He was only 16 years old at the time of the crime. The boy in the videotape turned out to be local resident Rocky Marciano Price. Rocky Marciano Price lived with his parents and 5 siblings on Winnie Hill Road in Accrington. It had been the Price family home for about 3 decades. The young lad had an impressive array of mental health abnormalities. Rocky had suffered from autism, attention deficit disorder, and hyperactivity since childhood. His low IQ created additional learning and communication challenges. He attended an alternative school in Barnoldswick several days a week and was described by teachers as a very quiet and non-speaking student. In 2015, a psychologist assessed Price as having a limited understanding of his own emotions and emotional well-being. He had pronounced impairments in understanding the connections between events and emotions. Another 2016 report described Price as unresponsive to strangers and in constant need of supervision and care. Timothy Bradley, who taught at the school for 18 months, said they were always looking for ways to involve him in education, but Price preferred practical things to academic subjects. Price hardly ever engaged in conversation, even when it came to a topic that interested him. Teachers described Rocky Price as quite strong physically and tough for his age. He went to the gym regularly, liked to tend to the chickens on the family farm, and loved watching movies and playing Xbox. The guy lived in his own world and wasn't always aware of his actions. So what drove him to attack Lindsay Bubeck? Nothing at all. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time when Rocky Price was hunting lonely women. He was looking for a woman to kill, and he didn't care who it was. This was a completely random murder at the hands of a stranger. On August 12, 2020, exactly 1 year after the crime, Price finally stood trial. Rocky Marciano Price was unanimously found guilty by a jury after an 8-day retrial and 4 hours of deliberation. Appearing via video link from Her Majesty's Prison, Weatherby Price, 17, did not react in any way when the judge read out the verdict. There was also no reaction from his parents in court. He pleaded guilty to helping dispose of Lindsay's body, but claimed he played no part in her death. Rocky Price claimed he was approached by a male stranger and asked to assist in the burial of the woman for a fee. In a prepared statement, he admitted moving the garbage can and burying the body, but said he had no involvement in Lindsay's death. However, a search of his home in Accrington revealed plastic bags that were identical to those at Lindsay's grave. A tracksuit and other clothing were also analyzed and matched the ones he was wearing on surveillance cameras on August 12. Defense attorney Mark Fenholz told jurors that Price did a horrible and heinous act by burying the woman's body in the cemetery, but he was not her killer. Despite the abundance of evidence against him, Rocky Price pleaded not guilty to the crime but admitted to moving Lindsay's body. After 2 days of questioning, Price, through his attorney, prepared a statement to explain his movements between Coppice, where police believe Lindsay was killed, and the cemetery where her body was found. But the prosecutor affirmatively stated that Rocky Price acted completely alone. The motive for the random attack on the 47-year-old mother of two was never revealed, as the perpetrator did not even know the victim. The judge sentenced Price to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. He will only be released when the parole board decides he is not a danger. The judge said the attack was swift and brutal. There was no doubt the defendant sprang with the intent to kill a woman who was walking by. Just minutes before Lindsay's incident, Zoe Braithwaite had managed to get away from a hooded teenager with her hands in her pockets, walking alone on a parallel path. Her sixth sense kicked in, and the woman was instantly wary. Zoe was confused by the guy's appearance. He looked out of place for a walk in the woods at that time of year. She quickened her step and then ran away. That probably saved the woman. If it hadn't been her, it could have been someone else. And it was Lindsay. This was a premeditated attack. After missing one woman, he didn't back off his plan to attack another lone woman. His actions after the crime clearly show that he had the ability to plan and reason. His teachers told the court that he was much better at practical tasks than academic subjects. He used this ability to hide the body. Rocky Price was found to have made 2 return trips to Coppice on the evening of August 12th. The first incident occurred at 6:55 p.m. when he was seen on CCTV cameras carrying a black rucksack. Possibly in it, he was carrying a found saw to dismember Lindsay's body. The next incident occurred at 8:28 p.m. when dog walker Anthony Deworst was seen pulling out an already empty garbage can. This is the same spot where his grandfather, who bears his name, and other family members are buried. Without panic or excitement, young Rocky Price, acting alone, set in motion a plan to dispose of Lindsay's body by placing it in a blue garbage can like a piece of trash, and then burying it in a shallow grave in Accrington Cemetery wrapped in 2 plastic bags. He set in motion a plan to dispose of Lindsay's body by first hiding her in a blue wheelie garbage can and then dragging her to the cemetery. Finding a quiet and secluded spot near the railroad line, he spent over an hour burying her body before leaving a saw, gloves, and a trash can at the scene. The murder of a stranger in broad daylight, for which there is no rational explanation, is particularly horrifying to all right-thinking members of society. The random nature of the attack suggests that the accused poses a very real danger to members of the public. The stalking of another woman before he killed Lindsay Bebeck demonstrates that his crime was not caused by a sudden loss of control. 24 hours after he was found guilty of the crime, publication restrictions were finally lifted by a judge, allowing his name and picture to be made public for the first time. Rocky Marciano Price's identity was kept secret during the first and second trials. The jury was told many important details about Price, but they could not be fully disclosed because of his young age. The judge rescinded the disclosure restrictions after the jury unanimously found Price guilty of the crime. The defendant's mental illness cannot in any way excuse or even explain his actions. After all, it is quite obvious that he realized that it was terribly wrong to kill, but did it anyway. Although fortunately such crimes are rare, they instill fear in society. However, the main question in this case remains unanswered. Why did the young guy need to kill a strange woman, and for what? Only Rocky Price knows the answer, but he didn't answer it. Perhaps if it wasn't Lindsay Bebeck, it could have been someone else. Lindsay's funeral was held at St. Margaret's Church in Hapton on September 20th. More than 200 mourners gathered at the church as police stopped traffic on Manchester Road while Lindsay's coffin, covered in flowers, was carried into the church. Dozens of flowers from friends, family, and strangers whose hearts were touched by Lindsay's story were left at the scene. Sarah described her mom as a very optimistic and positive woman. Lindsay was making plans for the future. She was planning a trip to Glasgow with her friend Sharon. She dreamed of finding love on the Match.com dating site. Lindsay Bubeck planned a long and happy life for herself and looked forward to the future with optimism. But all those dreams were interrupted one sunny summer day. Lindsay Bubeck's family and the detectives who investigated the crime welcomed the jury's unanimous verdict, but said no court verdict could ever bring Lindsay back or spare her family and loved ones the grief of loss. In front of the courthouse after the verdict was announced, members of the defendant's family wore t-shirts that read, "Wrongfully convicted, set this boy free." The back of the t-shirts read, "The killer is still at large. Maybe Price is an aspiring maniac. He just wanted to take a life, to feel what it's like, to watch someone die and mutilate them. Most likely, in any form, it's an absolute neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by problems with social interaction, motor skills, and behavioral stereotypes." In translation, the word autism means a person who has gone into himself or a person within himself. Autism is still an understudied developmental disorder that can occur due to genetic or hereditary abnormalities. The exact cause is not fully understood, but in our story, the punishment most likely fits the crime. Loretta Jones lived in Price at 468E, 400S, with her 4-year-old daughter, Heidi Jones. There she thrived to make ends meet for herself and her daughter. She was unmarried and young, but she gave her all for Heidi, who recalled most of the beautiful memories they had together. Loretta made most of the clothes Heidi wore as a kid, her dolls, and they lived a happy life together. But soon their happy life would end abruptly. On that warm summer night, kissed her mother goodnight, unknown whether it would be the last time she would see her alive. On the morning of July 31st, 1970, Heidi Jones woke up to see her mother, Loretta, lying lifelessly on the living room floor of their home. Heidi, who was too young to comprehend the whole situation, went out of the house. Outside she saw her neighbor, Sue and Hover, who was digging out worms at her apartment. Hover, on seeing Heidi, beckoned her to come closer to ask her what she was doing. But Heidi replied to her saying, "I can't. I think my mommy is dead." Hearing these words made Hover immediately abandon what she was doing to follow Heidi in to check out the situation. In Loretta's home, Hover found Loretta lying face down, naked from the waist down and her back and hair matted in blood. Hover called the police and the police chief Art Poloni responded to the scene. After the police arrived around 11:40 a.m. on July 31st, 1990, they confirmed Loretta was dead. They found blood everywhere in the living room and Loretta had 17 stab wounds. The investigators didn't see any sign of forced entry, which suggested that she had known her attacker. Loretta also didn't have any defensive wounds, which showed she hadn't tried to defend herself during the attack. The medical examiner also concluded that Loretta was killed with a small, narrow knife, that she had bodily fluid on her, but unfortunately, DNA testing was still in its early stages at the time. There was no CCTV camera to capture how the whole thing went down, but since there was a little girl in the home at the time of the incident, the investigators turned to her to get some answers. Heidi told the investigators that after her mom had put her in bed, she returned to tell her not to come out of her room. She also said she never heard her mother scream or struggle on the night of the murder, but she did mention something that got the investigators concerned. Heidi had told the investigators that Tom did it. The police began to search for answers as they combed the house. Eventually they found Loretta's diary, and in it was a name similar to the name Heidi mentioned, Thomas Eagley. According to the diary, Thomas and Loretta dated for 2 months before her death, and that was the only information they could get on Thomas. There was little to nothing that the investigators could make out of the case except for a name mentioned by a 4-year-old Heidi, who was asleep at the time of the murder. But soon the police had another lead to follow. Around 9:30 p.m., Gulaferno, a 10-year-old girl who lived 3 blocks away from Loretta's house, was outside her house riding her bike with her brother. On seeing that it was already getting dark, Kolo's brother left his bike and went inside the house, while Kolo was alone outside. She soon decided to go in as well, leaving her bike outside. As she walked to the main door, a man attacked her from behind, gripping her and covering her mouth with his palm. Luckily, Kolo was able to get her mouth out of the kidnapper's grip, and she let out a deafening scream. The man got scared and left Kolo to take to his heels. Kolo was able to see her attacker and also the direction he went. She told the police he ran in the direction of Loretta's house. Later at the police station, Thomas Igley's picture was included in the lineup, as he was already a suspect in a murder case on the same night. Kolo pointed out Thomas as the person who tried to kidnap her, and so Thomas was brought in for questioning. The investigators believed that the case of Kolo and Loretta were related. They questioned Thomas on August 1, 1970, based on the two incidences separately, and he denied his involvement in them. Thomas said on the night of the homicide, he hitched a ride with some teenagers and they later dropped him off when they got to Price at a fast food joint where he had hamburgers. He said he then went to a bar called Highway Rendezvous on Springland Road around 11:30 p.m., and after that he went to his home. He said he didn't see Loretta that day. The investigators visited the bar to ask if they truly saw Thomas that night, and the owner of the bar confirmed that she saw him, and that he was a bit skittish, nervous, and had red speckles on his shirt. The investigators asked Thomas about the red speckles mentioned on his shirt, as he told them it must have been paint, as he had been painting all day. Regardless of his statement, the investigators collected the clothing Thomas told them he was wearing that night, and he collected his hair, blood, and fingerprint samples too. With that, investigators believed they had enough probable cause to arrest Thomas. And they did. Thomas was arrested when he lived in a motel in Helper, Utah, with his girlfriend, who was 8 months pregnant. But during the preliminary hearing on November 5, 1970, prosecutors brought in witnesses that provided an alibi for Thomas. The prosecutor said the fiber evidence was similar to the rug that Loretta had in her home. But that was not enough, as Thomas was known to have visited Loretta in her home before the incident. However, because Colofenal could identify Thomas as the man who tried to abduct her, he was charged with attempted kidnapping, and so he spent 90 days in jail. After Thomas's jail time, he was released back into society, and in 1971, Thomas moved to Rockford, Colorado, but still, Loretta's case remained unsolved. For years, Heidi dealt with the trauma of her mother's death. She would talk about the incident to her grandmother, who had immediately taken her in after her mother died. She continuously told her grandmother that she was unsure that Tom killed her mother and everything Heidi said, her grandma wrote down in a journal. Heidi also told her grandmother that Tom always slapped and hit Loretta and that he was always mean to her. Soon the adults in the house tried to make Heidi forget about the incident and stopped her from talking about it. Although Heidi stopped talking about it, she never forgot about what happened to her mother in 1970. As Heidi grew, she understood that Loretta must have endured the severity of the attack because she wanted to protect her, and because of that, Heidi determined that she owed her mother justice and she would get it for her. Decades passed and Heidi moved on with her life, but never for once forgot about her mother's case. Although Heidi still held her mother in her heart, she didn't really push for the case to be reopened. But one day, Heidi was inspired by a TV show called Unsolved Mysteries. She started a massive letter campaign sending them to FBI, Price City Police Department, and Carbon County Sheriff, but none of them responded. Still, she continued to write one letter after another. In 2009, 43-year-old Heidi made a post on her social media, and one of her former high school friends, David Brewer, reacted to her post. The two reconnected after a long time, and during their conversation, learned that David was working with the Carbon County Sheriff. Heidi thought this was an opportunity for her to get her mother's case reopened. She tracked David and purposely ran into him at a local arts festival, so she could talk to him about her mother's cold case. David granted Heidi the audience that she needed, and in the end, after he had listened to her, David was moved by Heidi's story. At the same time, he was surprised that he had never heard of Heidi's story when they were in high school. Heidi narrated how her mother kissed her goodnight and how the door of her room later opened to reveal her mom, telling her never to come out as if she knew something bad was going to happen. She also explained how she believed that Tom had killed her mother. Heidi mentioned that though her memory was murky, she had a faint memory of what looked like Tom on her mother, either forcing her to be intimate with him or stabbing her. But what Heidi didn't hear was her mother scream. Hearing her story, David decided to help Heidi, and Lorena's case was finally reopened. David Brewer started to work on the case, but the odds were stacked against him. He tried to use the crime files, but they had been lost. All that he had was past media coverage and Heidi's murky memory. David tracked down Thomas, who was living in Rockford, Colorado, for more questioning. When he asked Thomas about what happened on the night July 30th, 1970, Thomas was able to give the details of what he ate and did on that day, but he said he couldn't remember Loretta or her name. At that moment, David was convinced that Thomas may actually be the killer. But since there was no evidence to convict him, David had to leave without arresting Thomas. David Brewer also tracked down Thomas's other-than-girlfriend, Marcia Hidego, to question her. Marcia told David that Thomas came home late the night of the murder, and he immediately took a bath with his clothes on. The next day, Thomas went to the laundromat, and when he returned home, She said Thomas was missing several clothing items. According to Marcia, she asked Thomas about his whereabouts, and he told her that he took hamburgers to a woman and her daughter. Although David could not really make something out of the information, he was more convinced that Thomas murdered Loretta. David had tried every other way, and the only thing he felt was left was exhumation. But he didn't know how Heidi would feel about exhuming her mother's corpse. But surprisingly, after David told Heidi of his thoughts, she said she would even get a shovel to dig the grave herself, if that would get justice for her mother. They proceeded with the exhumation, and their Heidi broke down so many times, but after the body was exhumed, they discovered water had damaged the whole body. So they could not get what they needed. However, they decided to exaggerate the outcome to the public by saying they had found new evidence that provided them with a lead. The news traveled far and wide, and soon David would get a phone call from a woman named Linda. Linda explained that she remembered the information she saw in the news of the exhumation on TV and decided to share it with the investigators. She told David Brewer that Loretta had in the name of the killer with her blood. A surprised David asked her how she knew this, considering that police did not allow anyone into the crime scene. Linda explained that she lived at Heidi's grandmother's house when she was in high school, which was the time of the murder. A day after the incident, Heidi's grandfather asked Linda and one of Heidi's aunts to go to Loretta's house to pack Heidi's belongings. Linda said because of that, police allowed them in, and on getting there, she saw with her own eyes a capital T and an O. This was a huge break in the case, but they needed a photo of the crime scene to prove this. David met with Heidi and explained the new information he got with her. David met with Heidi and explained the new information he got with her, and also expressed his pain about not being able to lay his hands on any photos of the crime scene as all were lost. And right away, Heidi remembered that a photo might be in a box of belongings that her grandmother had kept all those years. They went ahead to search her grandmother's house for the box, and in the box they searched for the photo. All that was inside the box was everything that concerned the case, including the journal where her grandmother wrote all that Heidi had said concerning the case. However, the most striking item was a photo of Heidi standing next to the outline of her mother's body. The picture was a really disturbing one. Anyone would have questioned why they were taking pictures of young Heidi next to her mother's pool of blood. But it turned out this photo would be of great use in the future. In the photo was Heidi and her mother's blood, with the two letters T and O in it. David Brewer began to piece the puzzle together. Reading the journal, he saw that Heidi mentioned how mean Tom was to her mom and the fact that she told everyone that Tom did it. And the most important thing, Loretta was trying to write the name of her killer with her blood as she struggled for her life, and the last thing she could write was an O. But even with this photo, the detectives needed more to capture Thomas Eagley, who was now believed to be Tom in this case. The case came to a halt again until someone decided to be of great help to the investigators. A woman named Lisa Carter called the police department to tell them she was Thomas Eagley's neighbor. She said Thomas came to her after she saw the exhumation video asking if she could watch his dogs, as the police could come for him anytime soon. Lisa Carter also believed that Thomas was Loretta's killer, so she offered to help in the case. She asked that the police allow her to wear a recording device to get Thomas's confession. The police agreed and an arrangement was made. Lisa approached Thomas and lied to him that her husband had been training to be a detective in Utah. She told Thomas that he had been a topic of discussion as he was already known as the murderer of Loretta Jones. All these words got to Thomas eagerly, but he didn't confess as he still couldn't trust Lisa. But after 2 days of trying to gain Thomas's trust, on July 26, 2016, he started to talk to Lisa about what happened on the night of July 30th, 1970. Thomas said he knocked on the door to Loretta's home and she let him in. He said he was in her house for intimacy, but Loretta turned him down, making him feel so worthless. He said Loretta left him in the living room to get something in the kitchen, and after she came back, he reached for a small knife and stabbed her. After stabbing Loretta, Thomas went ahead to get intimate with her, claiming that it was consensual. A confused Lisa asked how it was consensual after Loretta refused. But Thomas said throughout the time, Loretta never said no to him. She then asked him what happened after, and he told her that after getting intimate with Loretta, he lost it completely, and that was when he slit her throat. According to Lisa, Thomas said all these words without being sorry for all that he did. It appeared he only cared about his own safety. That confession was all the investigators needed to arrest Thomas. Not much is known about Thomas Eagerly, according to Loretta's sister, Carolyn Kendall. She only knew that Loretta dated Thomas one time, a blind date. Loretta told Carolyn that she didn't like Thomas, so she didn't want to have anything to do with him. This explains why Loretta refused Thomas's advances that night. 76-year-old Thomas Eagley was a local drifter who had lived in many places before and after he murdered Loretta. He never had a stable home life. He lived with many women and had been married 3 times. He had 5 children, but spent most of his time by himself. In August 2016, Thomas Eagley was charged in the 7th District Court with the legal equivalent of first-degree felony murder, as well as forced intimacy of first-degree felony. Thomas's official charge was criminal homicide murder in the 2nd degree, which was a statutory offense that applied to killing at the time under Utah law. Thomas was arrested without incident in Rocky Ford, Colorado, on a $1 million warrant issued on August 18, 2016. Thomas pleaded guilty to the murder, and his assault case was dropped. He was then sentenced to 10 years to life on November 22, 2016. Thomas never passed a remorseful comment except a written statement read by his attorney, David Allred, which read that he was sorry for what he did. But that didn't seem true after Thomas expressed that he believed he should be let go, since he hadn't committed any crime since he killed Loretta. He said in court that he could not understand why the family of the deceased chose to reopen a case of 46 years ago. It seemed like Thomas wasn't sorry for what he did, even after 46 years. According to Thomas, he didn't know that Heidi was in the room when he killed her mother. Loretta knew this, and it explains why she never struggled or screamed when he was stabbing her. Most likely, Thomas wouldn't have spared Heidi if he knew she was in the room. After he was sentenced, he complained to the judge that he didn't like his jail, which was the state prison in Salt Lake County, as it didn't allow visitors. The judge told him he could file an appeal. Heidi, who held in her pain for over 4 decades, had the opportunity to say all that she had in mind to her mother's killer. She expressed how traumatic the death of her mother was, and also spoke about how she wished Thomas Eagley would rot in jail and never have to see his loved ones again. She also said she'd make sure that he never walks free, even if he was eligible for parole after 10 years. Even though others called it closure, Heidi called it justice, saying nothing could give her the closure and relief she needed. The fact that justice was served meant everything to her. As we come to the end of this heartbreaking story of Loretta Jones' death, we are reminded that time does not heal every wound, especially the wound of the heart. We are also reminded of the evil that resides in the heart of man. Looking back at the clean slate that Thomas Eagley had with the law, we are left with the thought-provoking question, like why he chose to orphan Heidi at such a young age. A quick question before we go. What do you think about how Loretta's case was initially handled? Do you think law enforcement would have done better considering all they had available at the time? Ruth Penelope Penny Bell, known to most as Penny, was born on February 28, 1948, in Somerset, England. Her childhood was a mix of highs and lows. As a teenager, family problems intensified, leading 16-year-old Penny to leave home to start a new life. Despite her young age and lack of resources, she managed to forge ahead, buoyed by her energetic and friendly personality. Eventually, Penny married, and at the age of 30, in 1978, she gave birth to a son named Matthew. Details about her early adult life are sparse, including information about her first marriage, which was relatively short. In 1981, Penny married Alistair Bell, a successful real estate agent. They had been friends before their marriage, and Alistair readily accepted Matthew, raising him as his own son. To outsiders, they appeared to be a stable and prosperous couple. In 1982, Penny and Alistair welcomed their daughter, Lauren, Penny's second child and the first from her marriage with Bell. The family seemed to be thriving, settling into a comfortable home. The Bells' finances improved significantly, and in October 1987, they moved with their 2 children to a house valued at £500,000, approximately $626,000 in Bakerswood, in Buckinghamshire, an area regarded as a haven for celebrities at the time. Their life seemed idyllic, with a harmonious home free of any obvious strife. They enjoyed the privileges and comforts their financial situation afforded them. By the early 1990s, Penny had established herself as a successful businesswoman. She was highly organized, managing her busy schedule meticulously. Alistair also did well professionally, and though their family home was comfortably equipped, in the summer of 1991, the Bells hired a renovation team to refresh their home's aesthetics. They could easily afford the renovation expenses. Little did they know that their seemingly perfect world was about to collapse, and a tragic event would soon expose family secrets that no one could have imagined. June 6, 1991 began like any other day for the Bells. Alistair left the house at 8:30 a.m., as usual, to drop his son at school before heading to work. He bid farewell to his wife, who appeared radiant and cheerful as always. The night before, Alistair had noticed Penny seemed worried, but she assured him she was just exhausted. Alistair believed her as she fell asleep quickly. He thought the stress of the home renovations was taking a toll on her energy. As Alistair left with his son in the car, he noticed Penny didn't give her usual hand wave goodbye, but he attributed this to her being preoccupied with many things, including the disruptions caused by the renovation work. Later that morning, around 9:40 a.m., Penny left her home and got into her Arctic Blue Jaguar XJS. Before departing, she briefly spoke with the workers renovating her property, informing them she was in a hurry due to an appointment at 9:50 a.m. Strangely, Penny hadn't mentioned this commitment to her husband, nor had she recorded it in her diary or any other documents. She left hastily for this mysterious meeting. The morning proceeded as usual until, later that day around noon, a shocking discovery at the parking lot of the Gurnall Leisure Centre in Greenford, London forever changed the course of events. A passerby reported to the police the sight of a woman's bloodied body inside a parked car. The vehicle was identified as a blue Jaguar. Responding officers immediately noticed multiple stab wounds on the victim's body. Inside the car were the woman's belongings, quickly identifying her as 43-year-old Ruth Penelope Penny Bell. As the investigation began, her body was sent to the coroner's office, where it was determined she had been stabbed approximately 50 times in the chest and arms in what police described as a frenzied attack. Within the crime scene, the central console of the vehicle contained samples of wallpaper intended for the Bell's bedroom. Investigators found it peculiar that Penny had received these samples 15 days earlier, yet she had never shown them to her family. It appeared Penny might have been showing the wallpaper to someone in the car, or perhaps this person intentionally placed them there to stage the scene and mislead investigators. The only person Penny had discussed the wallpaper with was the interior decorator working at her home. That morning, she mentioned seeking the second opinion about the color, which is why she had them with her. Forensic investigations revealed more details about the brutal attack. It was determined that the assailant had stabbed Penny from the passenger seat, then exited the vehicle and attacked her again from the driver's window. Despite the implications, no one witnessed the attack. Police tried to reconstruct Penny's last movements that day and discovered that on June 3, 1991, 3 days before her murder, she had withdrawn £8,500, about $10,600 in cash from the joint bank account she shared with her husband. The purpose of this large cash withdrawal was unknown, especially since she had never withdrawn such a significant sum before. The police believed Penny had this money when she died, but it was not found in the car. Although robbery could be considered a motive, Penny's purse and wallet were still in the vehicle, making it strange for a thief to attack the victim so viciously. On June 8, 1991, the police held a press conference where it was reported that the parking lot of Gurnall Leisure Centre was very crowded at the time of the crime. The lot had 153 spaces and was almost full. However, the killer had an advantage. Penny's car was parked in front of a natural hedge barrier, obstructing the view from the front. This location might have been chosen by the killer for its potential to attack and escape unnoticed. Investigators believed the murderer would have been heavily bloodstained after the merciless attack, and it was likely that someone had seen them, as it would have been difficult to go unnoticed. Police requested the community's help, asking anyone who observed anything unusual to come forward. However, no witnesses reported seeing anyone covered in blood near the crime scene. Witnesses did, however, report sightings of Penny on the morning of her death. Around 9:45 a.m., a woman walking her dog near Penny's home saw a man in a brown or bronze car waiting on the side of the road. She stated that a blue Jaguar pulled up next to the car, and a man got into the passenger seat. Penny's blue Jaguar was quite distinctive, making it highly likely that it was her. The man was described as around 40 years old, of medium build, wearing a light shirt and dark trousers. Penny's usual route to the office was via the A40. A truck driver reported seeing the car matching the Jaguar's description in Greenford just before 10:30 a.m. He noticed the car was moving very slowly and had a passenger in the front seat. The driver seemed to be trying to park, but the passenger kept correcting the direction, steering the car back onto the road. As the witness passed the car, he saw the man's hand on the wheel and noticed a gold chain on his right wrist. Several other witnesses reported seeing the same blue car with its hazard lights on, moving very slowly and occasionally veering into the opposite lane. Despite these observations, no one paid much attention or stopped to see if the driver needed help. Others claimed to have seen Penny's car in the Gurnall Leisure Centre parking lot. However, the car was strategically parked near a hedge, limiting visibility from the front. A woman walking through the parking lot noticed the windshield wipers moving on a dry, sunny day and the hazard lights flashing, but she did not look inside the car. These sightings in the public pool parking lot happened less than an hour after Penny left her house. Another witness saw the blue Jaguar with a dark-haired man in the passenger seat. He watched the car enter the parking lot and saw the driver, presumably Penny, look at him and silently mouth a plea for help, though he heard nothing. Despite this, he ignored the call for help and continued on his way. Around 10:45 a.m., a witness saw a man leaving the swimming pool parking lot on foot. He was described as elegantly dressed and not carrying the swim bag, suggesting he wasn't there to swim. It was noted that one side of his face appeared disfigured. Penny had been stabbed multiple times, but the witness did not see any blood on the man's clothes. Similarly, a driver reported seeing a car speeding along Greenford Road. She said she pulled in front of it, thinking there was enough time, but the car quickly closed the distance due to its high speed. The driver signaled with his lights and shouted for her to move aside. Initially, she didn't let him pass but became frightened and stopped. The police were perplexed by these testimonies and the general indifference of those who noticed something amiss but did nothing. Investigators firmly believed that Penny knew her killer. During their examination, they found fingerprints in Penny's car belonging to a man named John Richmond, a former neighbor of Penny and Alastair in Whitmore Road in Harrow, before the family moved in 1987. John, who had a criminal record for forgery and smuggling, was arrested in April 1992 and held in police custody until July 1992. He was eventually released after the police decided not to press charges. In December 1994, John contacted the Daily Sun newspaper, claiming he was the person Penny had planned to meet on the morning of her murder, but that they had parted ways before she was killed. He also claimed her death was a contract killing and that he knew the perpetrator. He offered to reveal the name in exchange for £80,000, about $100,000, however. Authorities suspected this was an attempt to recoup losses from a recent bankruptcy. Instead of paying John for the information, the Daily Sun contacted the police. Without anything to corroborate his claims or conclusively link him to Penny's murder, the police assumed his statements were false and driven by financial interest, and no charges were brought against him. Alastair, Penny's husband, was also considered a suspect, being the primary beneficiary of his wife's estate and life insurance. However, there was no evidence linking him to the murder, and he had a solid alibi confirmed by co-workers. Media speculation also arose about Alastair's homosexual affair, suggesting his lover might have killed Penny out of jealousy. Penny was aware of her husband's bisexuality. When they met, Alastair was in a relationship with another man, who even participated in their wedding ceremony. Police rigorously questioned Alastair about this, but later ruled him out as a suspect. It was also revealed that until 1982, when daughter Lauren was born, Penny had volunteered at Samaritans, a charity offering emotional support to people dealing with issues like anxiety, distress, and suicidal thoughts. The police considered the possibility that Penny might have acted as a counselor to someone mentally unstable, leading to the murder. However, this theory did not hold up. The investigation concluded it was very likely Penny knew her killer, but establishing a motive proved challenging. The robbery theory didn't fit the scene, though the whereabouts of the money she withdrew the day before remained unknown. There was no evidence of sexual assault, yet the frenzied nature of the attack suggested a personal motive. In 1993, John Bradley, a former royal stewardess, was similarly murdered with a knife as she got into her BMW in East London. Newspapers nationwide quickly reported the similarities between the two murders. Both victims were successful business executives in their 40s and died within 5 kilometers of each other. Like in Penny's case, Jean was not sexually assaulted and her purse remained intact in her car. A witness saw the suspected murderer fleeing the scene and chased him but lost him in an underground parking lot. Blood and DNA traces found at the crime scene did not match Jen. However, investigators could not link the samples to anyone and found no connection between the two murders. To this day, the murder of Jen Bradley remains unsolved. Following the failed attempt to link Penny's case with James, the police resumed their investigation. They considered convicted murderer Robert Napper as a suspect but ultimately ruled him out. The officers later announced that up to 30 people who might have been in the parking lot at the time of the businesswoman's murder had not yet come forward to report if they saw anything on the morning of June 6, 1991. Alastair Bell made a public plea for witnesses, but it was in vain. During the investigation, over 8,000 people were interviewed and more than 2,500 written statements were recorded. Although Michael Flynn, a business associate of Alastair and Penny, offered a reward of £20,000, approximately $25,000, for evidence leading to a conviction. The case grew cold. The tragedy of Penny Bell's murder didn't end in June 1991. 10 years later, when Lauren was 19, her father Alistair told her he no longer had the capacity to love and asked her to leave the family home. Her older brother Matthew had left for boarding school a few years earlier. Over the years, Lauren has given several interviews, expressing that everything in her family seemed to break apart from the moment her mother died. She described her mother as the glue that held everyone close, and since her passing, friends and family drifted apart, which she found deeply saddening. Lauren remarked that contrary to the belief that families come together in the wake of tragedy, her family experienced the opposite. She lamented that while similar cases often see families holding candlelight vigils and trying to love each other more, the Bells mourned differently. She said that since 1992, her father has been a prisoner of his own grief, no longer seeing or speaking to anyone and still living in the family home. Lauren noted that the lack of maintenance on the grounds of their once imposing property made it appear abandoned. In 2022, Lauren, now a mother herself, gave an interview. She revealed that she had become a detective in an attempt to solve the mystery of what happened to Penny. She enlisted the support of former Metropolitan Police Detective Brian Edwards, who led the initial investigation into the murder and retired in 1999. The two teamed up since 2021, marking 30 years since Penny's murder, and are determined to solve the mystery surrounding the horrendous crime. Lauren announced they would offer a reward of €20,000 for any information that could help identify the perpetrator and bring them to justice. Retired Detective Edwards stated to the same media outlet that Penny's case had always troubled him, and when Lauren contacted him, he did not hesitate to get involved again. Together, they are scrutinizing every detail of Penny's life to find new evidence, hopeful they will uncover the culprit and, with police support, bring the killer to justice. More than 2 decades after Penny Bell's bloodied body was found in her distinctive blue Jaguar, the case remains one of the most enduring and enigmatic unsolved crimes in the United Kingdom during the 20th century. 40 years ago, an American teenager was found bludgeoned to death in a cemetery in New Jersey. Her face was so badly injured that it was impossible to identify her at the time. The American public began to refer to her as Princess Doe, the Jane Doe who had died too young. For 4 decades, her real name has been a mystery until now. Hi and welcome to Mysterious 7. I'm Michael, and today's episode, I'm going to take you guys through the story of how Princess Doe was killed, how her identity was revealed, and how her killer was finally caught. Let's get right into it. Princess Doe was a previously unidentified American teenager from West Babylon, New York. She was found murdered in Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Blairstown, New Jersey on July 15, 1982. Her face had been bludgeoned beyond recognition. Her case gained national attention, and the public took a special interest in unraveling her story and finding answers. Thursday, July 15, 1982 at around 8 a.m., gravedigger George Keyes discovered the body of a young girl in the rear section of the Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Blairstown, New Jersey. The body was found lying on its back just over a steep bank that leads to a creek below. The victim's face had been beaten beyond recognition with a yet-to-be-determined object. Due to the significant decomposition of her body, even her eye color could not be confirmed. The young girl was dressed in a red short-sleeve shirt. A peasant-style skirt was found lying on top of the victim's legs. No footwear or undergarments were found. No conclusive evidence was found, but this was difficult to determine because of how much the body was decayed. A golden cross necklace was found tangled in the victim's hair. 2 earrings were found in her left ear. Red nail polish was found on the right hand only, and she had no surgical scars, distinct birthmarks, or tattoos. Scars or marks on the head or face area could not be known due to the condition of the body. Forensic anthropologists determined that the victim was not pregnant and had never given birth, and was most likely between the ages of 18 and 14 years old at the time of her death. Toxicology did not reveal any traces of drugs, but was not entirely conclusive because of the time elapsed between the death and the discovery of the body. It is believed that the body was discovered after 2 to 3 days or possibly even weeks of exposure to the elements. This was especially difficult to determine because of the hot and humid weather in the area at that time. The forensic examination indicated that the girl had attempted to fight back or defend herself from her attacker, as injuries indicating trauma to her hands and arms were visible. The girl's body was buried in the Cedar Ridge Cemetery, not far from where she was discovered in January 1983. Donated funds were used to pay for the victim's coffin and headstone. The headstone was engraved with the text, "Princess Doe, missing from home, dead among strangers, remembered by all. For many years, Princess Doe was thought to be Diane Janiskai, a missing teenager from San Jose, California who vanished on July 30th, 1979. This theory was propagated by several law enforcement officials in the state of New Jersey, who went as far as to hold a press conference identifying Diane Dye as Princess Doe. However, Lieutenant Eric Krantz, the Princess Doe case's original lead investigator, maintained that Diane Dye was not a viable candidate for Princess Doe's identity. Krantz's feelings were shared by Diane's family and investigators in California, who were particularly angered by the conduct of the New Jersey law enforcement. In February 2003, Princess Doe's DNA was compared with a DNA sample from Diane's mother, Patricia, and it was conclusively determined that Princess Doe was not Diane Dye. After seeing images of the girl's clothing in the newspaper, a witness named Anne-Marie Latimer reported to officials that she remembered seeing a girl wearing the same clothing as Princess Doe purchasing cigarettes on July 13, 1982, just 2 days before her body was found. Latimer stated that she was shopping with her daughter at a supermarket across from the cemetery and observed and was able to describe the victim's clothing. The shirt and skirt themselves were traced to a manufacturer in the Midwestern United States, although the brand labels were missing. 3 people reported after viewing the photos that they had bought similar clothes at a Long Island store, which is now closed. On September 22, 1999, the body of Princess Doe was exhumed from the Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Blairstown so that DNA samples could be taken. The body was reburied in the same location. After a 2012 photo composite of the victim was released, it generated new tips as it resembled several missing girls from across the country. One theory was submitted that Princess Stone may have been a runaway and could have been an individual using false names while employed at a hotel in Ocean City, Maryland. In February 2012, a sample of her hair and a tooth were examined through isotope analysis and indicated that the victim was most likely born in the United States, at least 7 to 10 months in the Midwestern or Northeastern United States. The tooth sample indicated she could be from Arizona. It is also believed that the girl had spent a long time in Long Island, New York. Lieutenant Krantz, now retired, toying the name Princess Doe early in the investigations and also managed to get the case covered extensively in the media. The case was used as the impetus for recording unidentified crime victims in the MCIC database at the national level. Princess Doe became the first such case entered by the FBI director. After extensive print media coverage in 1982, Lieutenant Krantz, who was the original lead investigator from the Blairstown Police Department, was contacted by HBO regarding the Princess Doe case and asked if the channel could chronicle the case in an upcoming documentary entitled Missing. Krantz agreed, and the segment was filmed over several weeks. Krantz was shown following leads as they came in. The documentary featured actual footage of the recovery of Princess Doe's body, along with footage shot by HBO of Princess Doe's 1983 funeral. The case was also featured on America's Most Wanted in February 2012 in hopes of generating new information about the case. The same year, the most recent reconstruction was broadcast on CNN. On July 15, 2012, a memorial service was held for the 30th anniversary of Princess Doe being discovered at the top of the ravine where her remains were found. Over 100 citizens attended, as well as several reporters and cameras. The victim's clothing as well as her photo reconstructions were on display for public viewing. On October 12, 2014, Princess Doe was honored at a missing persons rally in the area. In the years between the first discovery in the body and the final identification, several theories cropped up. The first one was that Princess Doe was actually Diane Dye, a young girl missing from California, which has now been definitively disproved. Secondly, the killer of Princess Doe was already imprisoned for another homicide. A man called John Rees was briefly suspected as he was convicted of killing another woman in nearby Belvedere, New Jersey, but there was no real evidence of a connection with Princess Doe. The third theory was that Princess Doe was either a runaway that was known to work in the Ocean City, Maryland area or a prostitute who worked at the local truck stop. The information for these two possibilities was highly inconclusive. Nobody from the local area came forward to identify Princess Doe on or off the record. It seems unlikely that not one single person would come forward if she was known in the area. The fourth and disturbing theory was that Princess Doe was killed by a Blairstown police officer, and that is why the case was never solved. But this claim is completely unsubstantiated. There are retired local law enforcement officers who still follow and contribute to the case even after 40 years. The fifth theory was that Princess Doe was a victim of a serial killer known to operate in the area, such as John Cleiss, Henry Lee Lucas, or Joel Rifkin. Though local law enforcement was aware of these claims, none were found to be credible. A sixth theory was that Princess Doe was an out-of-state teenager who worked at an area camp. Again, this was never proven. And now we come to the seventh theory, that Princess Doe was killed by a man named Arthur Kinlaw. For many years, this was the most current theory. Many of the facts fit the case, and this theory was explored on the America's Most Wanted website. Several New York Newsday articles referenced this theory that was published in 1999 and February. Mr. Kinlaw was already imprisoned for other crimes. But since Princess Doe's body wasn't identified, his involvement in her murder could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Princess Doe's body was re-exhumed in November 2020 using a grant, and she underwent DNA extraction for genetic genealogy. In May 2021, investigators were notified by the NCMEC, or National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who were collaborating with Astria Forensics about obtaining DNA markers from degraded samples of Princess Doe's body using a grant. On June 18, 2021, investigators received the news that Astria Forensics agreed to extract DNA and construct a DNA profile. On February 10, 2022, Astria Forensics relayed to investigators that the creation of a DNA data file was successful. The results were sent to the NCMEC's consulting genealogist from Innovative Forensics Investigations. The managing officer was Jennifer Moore, who agreed to perform unlimited genealogy testing free of charge. On February 22, 2022, Innovative Forensics announced to investigators that they had found a candidate for Princess Doe. Investigators went to West Battle on New York, where they met Robert Olenyok Jr., Princess Doe's brother. They also collected a DNA sample from Princess Doe's sister, which mitotyping technology used to build a mitochondrial DNA profile. The Union County Prosecutor's Office Forensic Laboratory assisted by creating an STR-DNA profile through the victim's sister's DNA sample. Mitotyping technology sent their results to the Union County Prosecutor's Office Forensic Laboratory, then sent both the mitochondrial DNA and STR-DNA profiles through the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification. On April 29, 2022, the center identified Princess Doe as Dawn Olenek. Her identity was formally announced on July 15, 2022, the 40th anniversary of her discovery. Robert Olenyok Jr. said that Olenyok left their home at her mother's request, and she was never seen or heard from again. Way back in 1999, evidence came to light that Arthur and Donna Kinlaw may have been involved in Princess Doe's murder. Donna was arrested in California for attempting to commit welfare fraud by using the name Eliana, which was traced to a Long Island native. When the police questioned her, she gave them details about the murder of Linda, and her testimony put the Kinlaws behind bars. Donna gave details about 2 murders Arthur had committed of 2 other female victims who remain unidentified today. After Arthur was faced with a death sentence, Donna told authorities that Kinlaw had killed another woman, a sex worker, earlier in 1982. She told police that she was with Arthur in the cemetery and witnessed him commit the murder. Another report states that Donna Kinlaw said that in July 1982, her husband brought home a teenage girl, left home, and returned without her. He later apparently disposed of his clothing and cleaned his vehicle. Afterward, he threatened his wife, claiming if she did not attend her job, he would take her life as he did to the girl he brought home. However, a lack of cooperation meant that Arthur Kinlaw was not charged. Lieutenant Stephen Spears, who worked on the case as a member of the Warren County Prosecutor's Office, from which he is now retired, stated that Kinlaw claimed responsibility for her death, but I have no physical evidence to confirm that. And without the identity of Princess Doe, I have no way of connecting the dots, so to speak, putting her in a place where he could have been or would have been at the same time. Spears also reported that he doubted the confession because the Kinlaws could not provide a name for Princess Doe, even though they claimed to have been with her for some time. Even though he questioned the credibility of their statements, Spears does not believe the victim was native to Long Island, New York. However, Donna Kinlaw was interviewed by a forensic artist who created a sketch of the girl she claimed to have met, which does resemble the most recent composite. Arthur Kinlaw remained incarcerated for 2 counts of second-degree murder. Following the 2022 investigation of Princess Doe as Dawn Olenyok, Arthur Kinlaw was reconsidered as a suspect and later charged with Olenyok's murder. Dawn Olenyok was born on August 5, 1964. She had been a junior at Connequot High School in Bohemia, New York, where she had lived with her mother and sister, authorities said, but she soon moved out of the family home. According to her brother, she was thrown out of her home by her mom. She ended up getting killed in a cemetery, leaving no clue as to her real identity. But for more than 20 years, the name of her suspected killer was no secret. In 1999, the wife of Arthur Kinlaw, the convicted pimp who today is serving time for the murder of many other Long Island women, tied her husband not only to those deaths, but to the brutal slaying of the girl in the Blairstown cemetery. In an interview with Newsday at the time, Donna Kinlaw recounted how her husband in the summer of 1982 brought a girl of about 18 years old back to their central Islay home. She told the newspaper as well as police that her husband left with the woman, but later returned home alone, appearing shaken. About 2 weeks later, according to Newsday, she read that police in Belvedere, New Jersey had found the body of a dead girl who fit the description of the girl who was in their house that night. He kept saying, "What does it say? What does it say? Does it say who the person was who got killed?" She said her husband asked. From the story she read aloud to her husband, Donna Kinlaw told Newsday that she remembered that the New Jersey police named the dead girl Princess Jane Doe. Not long afterward, investigators exhumed her body to recover the murder victim's femur bone in hopes of using her DNA to identify her. And in fact, investigators acknowledged that Arthur Kinlaw confessed to the New Jersey murder in written statements dating back to February 2005. But it was not until April of this year that Don Olenet was positively identified. Arthur Kinlaw, now 68, is currently imprisoned in Sullivan County, New York on 2 other first-degree murder convictions from February. Among them was a teenager he knew only as Linda in April 1984 in the Bronx. Newsday reported, "I strangled her with my hand," said Kinlaw. "She was hit about the head by me with a bat." Arthur Kinlaw has now been charged with 1 count of homicide as the result of the subsequent investigation, witness statements, and his confession of Olenyok's murder. It is believed that after Don Olenyok refused his demands to go into prostitution, he drove her to New Jersey. They both ended up in Blairstown, where Kinlaw murdered her in the Cedar Ridge Cemetery. Neither Olenyok nor Kinlaw had a connection with the town. Kinlaw remains imprisoned at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York. Investigators are now looking to piece together Don Olenyok's movements in the time leading up to her death. The DNA Doe Project, also DNA Doe Project Incorporated or DDP, is an American non-profit volunteer organization formed to identify unidentified deceased persons, more commonly known as John or Jane Doe, by using forensic genealogy. Their volunteers identified victims of automobile accidents, homicides, and unusual circumstances, such as persons who committed suicide under an alias. The group was founded in February 2017 by Colleen Fitzpatrick and Margaret Press. Unraveling the mystery of Princess Doe has been a sensational success for genealogical DNA testing of exactly this kind. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest impact. And for the case of Princess Doe, that was exactly what happened. A molar root weighing just 200 kilograms would hold the answers that had eluded investigators for close to 40 years. With the help of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Princess Doe's Mueller and eyelash were submitted to Astria Forensics in 2021 for possible DNA extraction. What is so special about Astria is that they can extract DNA from samples that are degraded or otherwise would provide no value, said Carol Schweitzer, a forensic supervisor at NCMEC. "We knew that if anyone could get the information that was needed, Astria could, and they did." Kelly Kincaid, CEO of Astria Forensics, told NCMEC that they were lucky to find that the DNA was exceptionally well preserved and allowed for millions of pieces of information to be gathered to complete the DNA profile. This single DNA extract contained hundreds of millions of unique human DNA fragments, said Kelly. With these sequencing data, we were able to reconstruct her whole genome single nucleotide polymorphisms or SNP profile. This resulted in Astria being able to deliver genotype files to NCMEC and the Warren County Prosecutor's Office that could go on and be used to complete Princess Doe's genealogy. This technology that would not have been possible 40 years ago was just the break the investigators had been hoping for to identify Princess Doe's identity. Once Astria finished the sequencing, Innovative Forensic Investigations, or IFI, started to work on investigative genetic genealogy techniques to build a family tree that would ultimately lead to the true identity of Princess Doe, or who we now know as Don Olenyok. This work was only possible because of the collaborative effort of each agency, said Jennifer Moore, CEO of IFI. Our team brings forward a diverse set of skills that allows us to help find answers to cases. Echoing Moore's sentiment in today's press conference, Prosecutor Pfeiffer reiterated that science and technology made the impossible possible in this case. Don's case was deeply personal for the investigators involved, and their push for answers and justice never wavered. Don's family expressed deep gratitude to everyone who worked to find answers in Don's case. "This is a very big deal for my family," said Don's cousin. "I'd like to thank Blair staff for treating my cousin like she was one of their own. Touches our family deeply. My cousin is always in my heart," he said while tapping the photo of Don pinned to his chest. Blairstown. David Terwona gave up. "We were greatly appreciative of that. Since Princess Doe was the first unidentified persons case to be entered into NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, by the director of the FBI, William Webster, on June 30, 1983. This was a historic moment for missing and unidentified persons that has continued to play a crucial role in investigations since. The entry in NCIC has remained current and alive until today when she will be removed. The tenacity of law enforcement has never stopped, and they continue to pour resources and new technology into solving this case. And it's thanks to the collaboration between police authorities and genealogical DNA testing experts that Princess Doe was publicly identified on the 40th anniversary of the discovery of her body as Dawn Ulinick. So what do you guys think about this 40-year-old case finally getting resolved? Do you still have any theories about Princess Doe? Let us know in the comments section.